Evelyn Hartwell pulled out a worn little notebook and read 7 names aloud. 7 men who had looked her in the eye, smiled, and walked away. She did not cry when she said it. She did not apologize. She simply handed the list to the stranger standing before her in the summer dust and said, "So you know what you're walking into." And Caleb Dawson read every single name slowly, carefully, then looked up and said, "Looks to me like 7 fools had the same bad judgment." If a story like that belongs in your heart, subscribe to this channel, follow along until the very last word, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The notebook was falling apart. The leather cover had cracked down the middle, sometime around the 3rd name, and Evelyn Hartwell had wrapped a strip of brown ribbon around it to hold the pages together. She carried it in the front pocket of her apron every single day, not because she was proud of what was written inside, but because she had made herself a promise the morning after the 7th man rode out of her life without so much as a backward glance. Never forget what they said, and never believe a word of it. It was the middle of July in Willow Creek, Montana Territory, 1882, and the summer heat sat on the town like a fist pressing down. The kind of heat that made horses restless and men short-tempered, and dust rise up from the main road even when no wagon was rolling through. Evelyn had walked the half-mile from her family's land to the stockyard that morning because there was fencing wire to buy and feed prices to argue over, and she was the only one left on the Hartwell property who knew how to argue them properly. Her father had been a school teacher. Her mother had died when Evelyn was 11. By the time she turned 16, she was running the small cattle operation on the edge of town with the kind of quiet, stubborn competence that most men in Willow Creek found deeply unsettling in a woman. She was 26 now, and the town had not gotten any more comfortable with her. She was standing near the water trough at the edge of the stockyard, tallying figures in the margin of a feed ledger when she heard the boots on the dry earth behind her. Heavy, even steps. A man who knew where he was going. She did not turn around right away. She finished the number she was writing. "Miss Hartwell." The voice was unfamiliar, low, unhurried. She turned. I was taller than she expected, broad through the shoulders, lean everywhere else, the kind of man who had spent his whole life outdoors and carried it in the set of his jaw and the color of his skin. Dark brown hair pushed back under a dust-colored hat. Eyes that were darker, still watchful, without being unkind. He had a short beard a few days past neat, and the kind of posture that said he was not trying to impress anyone. Caleb Dawson. She had heard the name once or twice in the past week. New to the territory. Riding through on his way to somewhere or staying, nobody seemed to know which. "Mr. Dawson," she said. "I was hoping," he said, "that I might offer to see you home this evening, if you have no objection." The offer was ordinary enough, the kind of thing men said when they had a particular interest and wanted to make it known. Evelyn had heard versions of it 7 times in the past 5 years from 7 different men who had all eventually found reasons to change their minds about her. She looked at him for a moment. Then she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the notebook. "Before you spend an evening you can't get back," she said. "There's something you ought to know about me, Mr. Dawson." He did not take a step backward. That was the first thing she noticed. She opened the notebook to the first page. "Thomas Aldridge," she said. "He came courting in the spring of 1877. After 6 weeks he told me I spoke too much at the dinner table, that a man had a right to eat his meal in peace." She turned the page. "Harold Pruitt. He lasted 4 months. He told me I had opinions about things that were none of my business, specifically about how he managed his money." She turned another page. "Jonas Wheeler. He told my father I was too educated for my own good, and that a woman who could read ledgers better than her husband was a liability, not an asset." She looked up. Caleb had not moved. He was listening the way a person listened when they were actually paying attention, not waiting for a pause so they could speak, but taking in every word. She continued. "Benjamin Holt said I was cold. Robert Marsh said I was difficult. William Crane told half the town I was unnatural because I did not cry when my last ewe died. I simply went and found a replacement." She paused. "And the 7th man, I won't speak his name here, he told me directly that I would die alone, and that I had no one to blame but myself." She closed the notebook, 7 men, she said. 7 different reasons. And the whole town has more or less agreed with all of them by now. She tucked the notebook back into her pocket with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times. So before you waste a perfectly good evening, you should know what it is you're considering. The stockyard was not a quiet place. There were cattle lowing somewhere behind the fence and 2 men arguing near the feed shed and the distant clang of a hammer working against iron. But the small circle of space between Evelyn Hartwell and Caleb Dawson felt very still. He looked at her for a long moment. Not with pity. Not with the particular expression men got when they were deciding she was too much trouble. Something else. Something harder to name. "May I see the list?" he said. Evelyn blinked. "I beg your pardon. The notebook." He nodded at her apron pocket. "May I see it?" "Why?" "Because," he said, "I want to read what those men wrote down as their reasons." "I didn't write their reasons in there," she said. "I just kept their names." "Their names are enough." He paused. "May I?" She held his gaze for another moment. Then more, because she was genuinely curious than because she intended to let him. She reached back into her pocket and held the notebook out. I took it carefully, opened it to the first page, read it slowly the way she had described. She watched his eyes move across the cramped handwriting, each name with a date beside it. Brief notes in the margins that she had added later when she was trying to make sense of it all. Spoke too freely. Knew too much. Did not perform sorrow correctly. He read every page. Then he closed it and handed it back. "Every one of those men," he said, "was afraid of you." Evelyn stared at him. "That's not—" She stopped. Started again. "That's not what they said." "No," he agreed. "Men who are afraid don't usually say so plainly. They find other words for it." He tilted his head slightly. "Too educated, too outspoken, too competent, too composed." He let a beat pass. "What they meant was that you made them feel small, and they did not know how to be larger, so they left." Evelyn had not moved. She was aware dimly that her grip on the ledger in her other hand had tightened. "You don't know me," she said. "You don't know anything about those men." "No, ma'am," he said. "You're right, I don't." He held her gaze steadily. "But I know what fear looks like when it's dressed up as criticism." The silence stretched. Somewhere behind them, one of the cattle kicked at the fence. "Mr. Dawson," she said at last, her voice carefully level. "I appreciate the sentiment, but sentiment doesn't change much around here." Maybe not, he said, "but an honest conversation might." She looked at him a moment longer. Then, against every instinct she had developed over 5 years of careful self-protection, she felt the tight, practiced composure in her chest loosen just slightly. Just enough. "My farm is 1/2 mile east," she said. "If you still want to walk me home, you're welcome to try." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something quieter than that. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I think I will." They walked in silence for the first quarter mile, not the uncomfortable kind. Evelyn had learned to distinguish between silences. There were silences that were waiting for her to fill them, and silences that were simply resting. This one was the latter. Caleb Dawson walked beside her at a pace that matched hers. Exactly. Neither hurrying her along nor hanging back to seem polite. And he looked at the land around them with the kind of attention that told her he was someone who made use of what he observed. "You been in Montana long?" she asked finally. "Few weeks," he said. "Came up from Wyoming. I've got a stake of land about 12 miles north of here, just east of the river. Came to town today to see about buying cattle." "Hartwell's has good stuff," she said automatically. Then caught herself. He looked sideways at her. "That's so." "That wasn't a sales pitch," she said crisply. "It was information." "I took it as information," he said. "No offense meant." She glanced at him. He was looking at the road ahead again, perfectly at ease. "You come from ranching?" she asked. "My father did. I spent most of my life working other men's land before I had enough to buy my own." A pause. "Took longer than I'd have liked." "Most things do." "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him more directly. "You don't talk much." I talk when there's something worth saying, he said. Otherwise, I find I mostly repeat what somebody else already said better. Despite herself. Evelyn almost smiled. What brought you to Willow Creek specifically? She asked. There are other towns on this road. I'd heard good things about the land. He paused. And I'd heard something about a woman who ran her family's operation alone and did it well. Evelyn stopped walking. He took 2 more steps before he realized she had stopped, and then he turned. Who told you that? She said. Man at the stage depot, he said. Old fellow, grizzled. Said, and I'm telling you his words exactly, he said. If you're buying cattle, go see Evelyn Hartwell. She'll tell you honest prices, and she don't put up with haggling from men who ought to know better. He watched her face. He seemed to think well of you. Evelyn thought she knew who that was. Old Franklin, who ran the depot and had known her father. One of the very few people in Willow Creek who had never looked at her sideways. He's a good man, she said, and started walking again. Caleb fell back into step beside her. Can I ask you something? He said after a moment. You can ask. The notebook, he said. Why do you still carry it? She was quiet for a moment. The road curved slightly here, and her land came into view ahead, the low fence, the buildings, the garden that she kept with the same stubborn precision she applied to everything. Because the morning after the last man left, she said, I made myself a promise that I would not spend the rest of my life trying to be smaller. That I would not cut away pieces of myself to fit into the space that someone else decided was the right size for me. She paused. The notebook is to remind me what happens when I do. He did not say anything for a moment. Then, that's the most sensible thing I've heard since I rode into this territory. Evelyn stopped again, this time at her gate. She turned to face him. Mr. Dawson, she said, what exactly is it you're hoping for here? He met her gaze, direct, unhurried. Right now, he said. A fair conversation with an honest woman. A beat. After that, I suppose we'll see. It was not the answer she had expected. She had been preparing herself for something more elaborate, something easier to dismiss. This was harder to dismiss, and she recognized that, and it annoyed her. All right, she said. Then I suppose we'll see. She pushed the gate open and walked through. She did not invite him in, but she also did not tell him not to come back. The trouble with Willow Creek was not that it was a cruel town. Cruelty, Evelyn had always thought, required a kind of deliberate intention that most of her neighbors simply did not possess. What Willow Creek had instead was something far more exhausting to navigate: certainty. The people of Willow Creek were certain about how things worked, about what was right and proper and natural and fitting, and they applied that certainty to everything around them with the easy confidence of people who had never needed to question it. They were certain, for example, that a woman who could argue feed prices with a merchant without blinking was somehow deficient in the softer qualities that made a woman worth marrying. They were certain that a woman who carried a ledger instead of a handkerchief was missing something essential. And they were absolutely unshakably certain that there was something fundamentally wrong with Evelyn Hartwell, because 7 men had decided so, and 7 men could not all be mistaken. She heard it in the way Mrs. Linden at the dry goods store paused her conversation just a half-second too long whenever Evelyn walked in. She heard it in the way the wives of the men whose names were in her notebook looked past her at church on Sundays, not with hostility, but with a kind of careful absence, as though she were a word they had decided not to pronounce. She heard it in the way the younger girls in town watched her, some with a confusion that might someday become understanding, and some with the beginning of that same careful distance they were already learning from their mothers. What she had never expected was for any of it to change. And she would have told you that honestly and without self-pity. Right up until the Tuesday morning, 3 days after the walk home from the stockyard, when Caleb Dawson appeared at her fence gate at 8 in the morning with a question about her breeding records and the most business-like expression she had ever seen on a man who was not actually there on business. Mr. Dawson, she said from the porch where she was already working on the morning's correspondence. You're early. Sun's been up 2 hours, he said. That's not early, that's just morning. She looked at him over the letter she was writing. Did we arrange a meeting? No, ma'am. He held up a folded piece of paper. "But I've been looking at my land figures, and I have some questions about the herd you're offering, and I thought since I was passing by." "Your land is 12 miles north," she said. "You were not passing by." A pause. "No, ma'am," he said. "I was not." She set the letter down. I was standing at the gate with his hat in his hands and the sun at his back, and he was looking at her with that same steady, watchful expression that she had decided over 3 days of thinking about it more than she intended to, was not something she had seen on a man's face before. Not directed at her. It was the look of someone who was paying attention, not because they were waiting for her to become something else, but because they were genuinely interested in what she already was. It was, she thought, profoundly inconvenient. "Come in," she said. "I'll put coffee on." He came back 4 times that week. Twice on the pretense of cattle business, which was legitimate enough that she could not reasonably object. Once to return a tool he had borrowed from Franklin at the depot that Franklin had mentioned she was also looking for, which was a transparent excuse, but executed with enough composure that she let it go. And once the 4th time with no pretense at all. He simply appeared at the gate on Friday evening as the sun was going down, held up a small cloth-wrapped package and said, "I found a book at the general store that I thought you might not have. The merchant said it came in last week." Evelyn came to the gate. The package contained a collection of essays by a writer she had been trying to find for 2 years. She stood there holding it and did not say anything for a moment. "How did you know I was looking for this?" she asked. "Franklin mentioned it," he said. "He knows what you read." "Franklin talks too much," she said. "He talks the right amount," Caleb said. "He said you'd say that too." She looked at the book, then at Caleb. "This doesn't change anything," she said. "I'm not a woman who's easily—" She stopped, reconsidered. "I'm careful," she said. "I've learned to be." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you not to be." "Then what are you asking?" I was quiet for a moment, the evening light settling across his face, and she thought she saw something there that he was choosing carefully before he let it out. "I'm asking," he said, "if I can come back tomorrow." She looked at him for a long time. Then she tucked the book under her arm and said, "Bring your own coffee. I'm not made of provisions." And she walked back to the house. Behind her, she did not hear him leave for a long moment, and when she listened carefully with her back turned, she thought she heard the sound of a quiet, genuine laugh. The talk started on a Wednesday. She had known it would. Willow Creek was small, and Caleb Dawson had been seen at her gate or on her road 5 days running, and there was exactly one interpretation that a town with Willow Creek's particular brand of certainty was going to put on that. She heard the first version of it at the dry goods store. She was reaching for a bolt of muslin when she caught the tail end of a sentence, Mrs. Holt's voice low and carrying. "Don't know what he expects to find there. Everyone already knows she's—" She did not hear the last word. She did not need to. She set the muslin on the counter and paid for it and left without looking at Mrs. Holt. She had learned years ago that engaging those conversations was like stepping into mud. You never came out clean, and you used up energy you needed for better things. But something had shifted. Something small, and yet distinct. Because for the first time in a long time, the words she did not hear did not land in that particular place inside her that they usually did. They did not find the spot that still, despite everything, wondered if 7 men and 1 whole town could all be wrong. She thought about Caleb Dawson reading the notebook. Slowly. Carefully. Every page. She thought about what he had said after. "They were afraid of you." She did not know yet if she believed it. But she knew that no one had ever said it before. And she knew that the saying of it had done something she had not expected. It had made her angry. Not at him. At the men whose names were in the notebook. At the neat, confident little explanations they had given for walking away. Explanations she had spent 5 years folding up carefully and storing as though they were truths she was obligated to keep. What if they weren't truths? What if they were just the things that scared men say when they run? It was on a Saturday evening, almost 2 weeks after she had first handed him the notebook, that she asked him, They were sitting on the porch, a thing that had simply developed naturally without either of them deciding it was what they were doing. He had come by after a long day, and she had been finishing a letter, and somehow the sitting had begun, and it was comfortable in a way that still surprised her. "Caleb," she said. He looked at her. "Why are you still here?" I was quiet for a moment, looked out at the land. "Because you haven't asked me to leave," he said. "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It isn't." He turned back to her. "I'm still here because I have not yet found a single thing wrong with you. And I've been looking because I wanted to know what those men knew that I didn't." He paused. "But what they wrote down as flaws, every one of those things, is something I'd consider a quality." Evelyn met his gaze. "Being outspoken," he continued, "being capable, knowing your own mind, not performing grief for the sake of other people's comfort." He was quiet for a moment. "Those aren't flaws, Evelyn. Those are the things that kept this farm alive after your father couldn't anymore. Those are the things that built every fence post and tallied every ledger and turned a failing operation into one that functions." He held her gaze. "The men who left didn't leave because you were too much. They left because they weren't enough." She had heard that last thought before, shaped differently in her own private mind. But she had never heard anyone else say it. She realized her hands were very still in her lap. "That is," she said carefully, "a very generous reading of the situation." "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it's just accurate." She looked at him for a long moment. In the failing light, in the quiet of the summer evening, with the sound of the land around them, and the notebook still in her pocket where she had carried it for 5 years. "Mr. Dawson," she said. "Caleb," he said. She looked at him. "Caleb," she said. And then she stopped, because she had been about to say something careful. Something that kept distance between them, that preserved the wall she had built with such deliberate work. And she stopped, not because the wall was gone, but because she was, for the first time in a long time, genuinely uncertain whether she wanted to keep building it. "I think," she said very slowly, "that you are going to be extraordinarily difficult to dismiss." The corner of his mouth moved. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I expect so." And they sat together in the quiet summer evening, and the land lay still around them, and somewhere out toward the ridge, a coyote called once, and was answered, and the night came down slowly over Willow Creek, like something that had been there all along, just waiting. But Willow Creek was watching. And not everyone who was watching was content to simply wait and see. Nathaniel Brooks had lived in the territory for 30 years. He had come with nothing and built it into something significant. And the way he had done that, the specific, patient, methodical way, was the thing that most people in Willow Creek admired without examining too closely. He was generous at the right moments. He donated to the church building fund. He was first to volunteer when the town needed a prominent name attached to something respectable. He was also the man who had quietly approached Evelyn Hartwell's father 6 years ago about purchasing the eastern 30 acres of Hartwell land. Her father had said no. 6 months later, the drought had hit, and her father had needed that sale to stay solvent, and Brooks had returned with a new offer, half of what he had offered before. Her father had still said no. He had found another way. Brooks had not forgotten. And when word reached him, as all word eventually did, that some newcomer cowboy from Wyoming was spending his evenings on the Hartwell porch and asking around about her cattle, Nathaniel Brooks began quietly and without apparent urgency to take an interest. He was not a man who worked fast. He was a man who worked thorough. He started at the barber shop, where he mentioned casually, the way one mentions weather, that he hoped this new fellow Dawson knew what he was getting into. That there was a reason the woman had been turned down by every reasonable man in the county. That he himself had tried years back to help the Hartwells out of a difficult situation, and that Evelyn had been difficult was the polite word for it. By the time the story had traveled 2 blocks, Evelyn had refused a fair price and insulted a good man, and her father had died bitter because of her stubbornness. Neither of those things was true. But Nathaniel Brooks had a gift for stories that sounded true. He had been practicing for 30 years, and the story was just getting started. Evelyn found out on a Monday morning. She was at the well when Martha Greer, who was not a gossip exactly, but who had a conscience that occasionally overcame her caution, came down the road and stopped and looked at Evelyn with an expression that was somewhere between sympathy and discomfort. "I don't know if you've heard," Martha said, "what's being said." Evelyn set the bucket down. "Tell me," Martha told her. By the time she was done, Evelyn's face was very still, and her hands were very careful, and the particular quality of quiet that settled over her was the kind that comes not from peace, but from a person who is deciding very deliberately what to do with what they feel. "Thank you," she said to Martha. "I appreciate you telling me." Martha nodded, looking like she wished she had not had to, and went on her way. Evelyn picked up the bucket. She stood at the well in the summer heat and breathed evenly, and thought about Nathaniel Brooks and what he wanted and how long he had been patient about it. She thought about the notebook in her apron pocket, about what it would mean to open it to the next blank page. Then she thought about Caleb Dawson's voice. "They were afraid of you." She picked up the bucket and walked back to the house. She had work to do, and she was not afraid of work. She never had been. She did not tell Caleb, not right away. That was the first decision she made, standing at the well with the bucket in her hand and the summer heat pressing down on her shoulders. She was not going to walk to his land and hand him this problem the way she had handed him the notebook, like something she needed someone else to carry. She had carried her own troubles for 26 years, and she was not about to stop now, because a man with steady eyes had said something kind to her on a porch. She was going to handle Nathaniel Brooks herself. The question was how. She spent Monday doing what she always did when she needed to think clearly. She worked. She mended the north fence line where a post had gone soft. She checked the water levels in the stock trough. She went over the breeding records for the third time that month. Not because they needed checking, but because the rhythm of the numbers steadied her. The way arithmetic had steadied her since she was a child, sitting beside her father, while he graded papers and let her add up columns in the margins. By Monday evening, she had a plan. By Tuesday morning, she was ready to put it into motion. She went to the land registry office. It was a small room at the back of the county clerk's building, smelling of old paper and ink, presided over by a thin man named Gerald Oakes, who had worked there for 18 years, and who treated every document in his care with the particular reverence of a man who understood that paper outlasted people. He looked up when she walked in with the particular expression he reserved for her, not unfriendly but cautious. The way people looked at someone they had been told was complicated. "Miss Hartwell," he said. "Mr. Oakes," she said, "I'd like to look at the original deed records for the Hartwell parcel. The full parcel, including the eastern 30 acres. He looked at her for a moment. "Any particular reason?" "Yes," she said. "A particular reason." She did not elaborate. He brought the records. She sat at the small table in the corner and read every page. Not because she did not know what was in them. She did. She had read them before years ago when she was first taking stock of everything her father had left behind, but because she wanted to hold the physical documents in her hands and remind herself of exactly what she owned and exactly what the terms were and exactly what anyone who wanted any piece of it would have to get through first. The eastern 30 acres were hers. Clean title, no liens, no encumbrances. Her father had died owing nothing to no one, which had been a point of profound personal pride for him, and she had maintained it with the same ferocity. Brooks could not take the land through legal means, which meant what he was doing instead was trying to take it through reputation. She understood that now. If he could make her look unstable, difficult, unreasonable, if he could convince the town and the new people coming through that she was a liability, that her word couldn't be trusted, that anyone who partnered with her was partnering with trouble, then eventually she would be isolated enough, financially pressured enough, that she would have to sell. Not because he forced her, because she had no other option. It was patient. It was thorough. It was exactly the kind of thing Nathaniel Brooks was capable of. She thanked Gerald Oakes and walked out into the summer morning, and she was already thinking about what to do next when she turned the corner and walked directly into Caleb Dawson. He caught her by the arm before she stumbled, let go the instant she was steady. "Miss Hartwell," he said. "Caleb." She looked at him. He was carrying a rolled paper under his arm, Survey maps, she thought, from the look of the paperweight. He had been to the land office himself. "What are you doing here?" "Same as you, probably." He looked at her face for a moment. "Are you all right?" She opened her mouth to say yes, said instead, "No, but I will be." A pause. "Have you heard what's being said?" "About you?" He nodded. "I heard it Saturday. I've been letting it sit before I said anything to you." She stared at him. "You heard it Saturday and didn't tell me." "You didn't need me to tell you," he said. "You already knew. I could see it." He paused. "I was waiting to see what you decided to do about it." She closed her mouth, breathed. He was, she thought, either the most perceptive man she had ever met, or the most infuriating one. Possibly both. "I went to look at the deed records," she said. "Smart," he said. "What did you find?" "Everything I expected. Clean title. Nothing Brooks can touch legally." She looked at him. "He's going after my reputation instead, trying to isolate me, cut off my business, my social standing. Whatever thin thread of it I had left until the land isn't worth holding on to." Caleb was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that was thinking, not retreating. "How long has this been building?" he asked. "The approach about the land 6 years. She paused. "The rest of it, the talk, the reputation that's been building longer. He's been feeding it. I just didn't know until now who had been tending that fire so carefully." Caleb looked at the survey maps under his arm, then at her. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Brooks approached me yesterday." Evelyn went very still. "He came to my land," Caleb continued. "Friendly, neighborly. Wanted to welcome me to the territory," he said. "And then very casually, very gently, he started talking about you." He met her eyes. "He said he was concerned. Said you were a troubled woman. That your father's death had affected your mind. That there had been incidents he didn't specify, just implied, that had made people worry." A pause. "He said he'd made a fair offer on your land twice, and been refused both times, and that he was only telling me because he wanted me to go in with clear eyes." The heat of the morning felt different suddenly. Heavier. "What did you say?" Evelyn asked. I said I appreciated his concern," Caleb said, "and that I'd form my own opinions." He paused. "Then I came here to look at the land records myself. Because if he's been making offers, I wanted to see if there was any paperwork." She stared at him. "Was there?" "Nothing filed. He made the offers privately, no witnesses, nothing recorded." He looked at her steadily. "Which means it's his word against yours, if it ever comes to that." Evelyn knew with a sudden cold clarity exactly how that calculation worked. The word of Nathaniel Brooks, 30 years in the Territory Church donations civic standing, against the word of Evelyn Hartwell, who could not keep a suitor and had opinions above her station. She knew which way that scale tipped in Willow Creek. "He's been very careful," she said. "Yes," Caleb said. "He has been." He looked at her. "But careful men make one mistake. They plan for the person they expect, and you are not the person he expected." She looked at him for a long moment. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, "that everything he's counting on depends on you being alone." He held her gaze. "And you're not alone." The morning traffic of Willow Creek moved around them, a wagon passing 2 women crossing the street ahead, a dog trotting purposefully along the boardwalk, and Evelyn Hartwell stood on the dusty main street of a town that had been deciding what she was worth for 5 years and felt something shift again. Deeper this time. More significant. She was not alone. She was not sure yet what to do with that. "This is not your problem to solve," she said carefully. "No," he said. "It's not." He met her gaze without flinching. "But I have a stake in how it comes out, and I'd like to help if you'll let me." He paused. "That's not charity, Evelyn. That's 2 people with aligned interests." She held his gaze for a beat longer than she intended to. "All right," she said. "Then here is what I need." What she needed, she explained. Walking back through town with the morning pressing down around them was evidence. Not of Brooks's intent was invisible, and Brooks was too careful to let intent become visible, but of the land itself. Of its value, its water sources, its yield history. Because what she suspected, what she had begun to suspect even before she knew Brooks was behind the talk, was that the eastern 30 acres were more valuable than anyone had let on, and that Brooks knew something about them that she did not. "There's been talk," she said, "about water rights, about a possible survey for a new rail line coming through the eastern side of the valley." She glanced at Caleb. "If that survey puts the line anywhere near my eastern parcel, the value of that land triples, at least." Caleb's expression sharpened. "Who told you that?" "Old Franklin, 3 weeks ago. He heard it from the man who came through on the stage from Helena." She paused. "Franklin doesn't repeat things unless he thinks they matter." "No," Caleb said slowly. "He doesn't." He was quiet for a moment. "So Brooks has been making low offers on land that's about to become considerably more valuable, and he's been working to isolate and destabilize you so that by the time that survey goes public, you'll be desperate enough to sell." "That's what I believe," she said. "It's a good plan," he said with a grimness that was not admiration. "It's a very good plan," she agreed. "For someone who expected me to be exactly where most people expect me to be by now. Struggling financially, socially isolated, willing to take any offer that would let me out." She said it plainly, without self-pity, the way she said most things. But he heard what was underneath it, and she saw him hear it, and she was surprised, not for the first time, by how little that bothered her. "What do you need me to do?" he said. "The survey maps," she said. "You were already looking at land records. I need you to find out what you can about the proposed rail line and how far east it runs. You're new here. You have no history with Brooks. You have legitimate business reasons to be asking about the land." She paused. "If I ask those questions, it confirms that I know something. You asking them is just a man getting to know the territory." He looked at her. Something that might have been respect moved across his face. "You've been thinking about this a long time," he said. "I've been thinking about Nathaniel Brooks since I was 19 years old," she said. "I just didn't know it was him I was thinking about." He came back 3 days later with what he'd found. He did not come to the front gate this time. He came to the barn, where he knew she would be in the late afternoon, because in the 2 weeks he had been paying attention to the rhythms of the Hartwell farm. He had learned that she spent the last hour of daylight in the barn, going over the feed and the animals, and settling what needed settling before dark. He came in through the open barn door with his hat in his hand and the survey maps under his arm, and she looked up from the stall she was checking and read his expression immediately. "It's worse than you thought," she said. "It's more complicated than we thought," he said. "The rail line isn't a maybe. It's been approved. The survey crew comes through in September." He spread the maps on the clean surface of a feed trunk. "The line runs exactly where you thought, within 100 yards of the eastern boundary of your parcel." Evelyn looked at the maps. She looked at the line drawn in pencil across the eastern valley. She looked at the small notation in the corner that indicated water access rights along the survey corridor. "He knew," she said. "He's known for months." "At least 6 months," Caleb said. "The approval came through in January. Someone with Brooks's connections would have had word before that. 6 months. He had known for 6 months, and for 6 months he had been tending the fire. Feeding the talk. Letting the town's certainty about her grow a little more solid, a little more unassailable, so that when the moment came, when she was alone, enough isolated enough, financially stretched enough, she would not have allies. She would not have options. She would have only his offer and the choice of whether to take it." She straightened up. Her hands were very steady. "He doesn't know you've seen this," she said. "No," Caleb said. "I asked the county land agent about the general survey corridor, framed it as someone interested in property values in the area. He had no reason to be cautious with me." "Good." She looked at the map for another moment, then rolled it carefully and held it out to Caleb. "Keep this. Don't let it leave your possession." "What are you going to do?" he asked. She looked at him. And for the first time since the stockyard, for the first time perhaps in longer than she wanted to admit, something that was not caution moved across her face. It was sharp and clear, and it was not quite anger, and it was not quite courage, and it was both of those things at once. "I'm going to do what I've always done," she said. I'm going to make sure that when this land becomes what it's worth, I'm the one still standing on it." He held her gaze. "I'll be standing right beside you," he said. She did not look away. "I know," she said, and she meant it. And that the simple, grounded, unadorned fact of it was the thing that surprised her most of all. The second thing Nathaniel Brooks did not anticipate was Martha Greer. Martha was not a bold woman. She was not the kind of person who walked into the center of anything, who offered her opinion uninvited, who put herself forward when the crowd was moving in the other direction. She had lived in Willow Creek her whole life, doing her best to cause no trouble and keep her head down, and she was good at it, and mostly she was comfortable with it. But she had a conscience, and her conscience had been bothering her for 10 days. She had told Evelyn's about the talk. That had been the conscience nudging her. But now she was beginning to understand, in the slow, reluctant way of someone who does not want to understand something, because understanding it means doing something about it, that telling Evelyn had not been enough. Because she also knew and had known for some time something she had not told Evelyn, something she had not told anyone. She had been in the milliner's shop 18 months ago, early on a Wednesday, when she thought she was alone, and she had heard Nathaniel Brooks talking to Hector Vane, one of his hired men, in the back storeroom. She had not been eavesdropping deliberately. She had simply been trying to find the owner, and the voices had found her first. She had heard Brooks say very clearly, and without hesitation, that the Hartwell land would be his before the year was out. That it was only a matter of making the woman desperate enough. That he had been patient long enough, and now it was time to be useful. She had not fully understood it at the time. She had told herself it was business talk, the rough edge of commerce, the kind of thing men said. She had put it away in the place where she kept things that were too uncomfortable to look at directly. But now she took it out and looked at it. And on a Thursday morning, 11 days after she had told Evelyn about the gossip, Martha Greer walked to the Hartwell farm and knocked on the door. Evelyn answered. She looked at Martha's face and stepped back immediately to let her in. "Tell me," Evelyn said. Martha told her. All of it. Every word she could remember from that morning in the milliner's shop, including the name of the hired man, including the time frame Brooks had set for himself. When she was done, the kitchen was very quiet. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Evelyn asked. Not with accusation, with genuine careful curiosity. Martha looked at her hands. "Because I told myself it wasn't my place. Because I told myself you'd manage. Because—" She stopped, swallowed. "Because I was afraid of what it would mean if I got involved." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "Martha," she said. Martha looked up. "Thank you," Evelyn said. "You coming here today took courage. I won't waste it." Martha looked at her, at the steadiness of her, at the quality of composure that the town called coldness, and that Martha had always thought looked more like someone who had learned to stand in weather and felt for the first time in many years that she had done the right thing and was glad of it. Evelyn sent word to Caleb that same afternoon. He arrived at the farm by early evening, and she told him what Martha had said, and she watched his expression. Do the thing it did when he was thinking, not closing off, but going inward, deliberate, turning information over. "A witness," he said. "To a private conversation," she said. "Not a contract, not a document, just words." "Words matter," he said, "especially in front of the right people." "The right people," she said. "That's the question." She looked at him. "Brooks has the trust of this town. He's built it carefully. If this goes to the county court, his word carries more weight than mine, more weight than Martha's. He'll say it was misheard. He'll say it was taken out of context. He'll be charming and reasonable, and everyone will believe him because everyone already does." Caleb leaned forward, his forearms on the table, looking at the maps she had laid out. "Then we don't go to the county court," he said. "Not yet." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "Brooks is counting on this being a private fight," he said. "He's counting on you being alone and isolated and dealing with this quietly because that's what he's set up. He's spent 6 months making sure the audience is already on his side." He met her eyes. "We change the audience." "How?" "The rail survey team comes through in September," he said. When they come through, they'll hold a public information meeting. Every landowner in the corridor has the right to attend to ask questions to put their land interest on record. He paused. What happens if you stand up in that meeting with your deed records, with Martha's testimony, with the documentation of every offer Brooks has made, and you lay it all out in public in front of every man in this county who has business at stake in that rail line? Evelyn was very still. He's been working in the dark, Caleb said. He's been counting on keeping this in the dark. You take it into the light in a public forum with witnesses and documents, and suddenly the audience isn't Willow Creek anymore. It's the rail company. It's the county commissioner. It's every landowner who has property along that corridor and has been wondering why Nathaniel Brooks has been buying so quietly. She thought about it. She turned it over, the way she turned numbers over, looking at the angles, the risks, the weight. It could fail, she said. Yes, he said. It could. He'll know I'm preparing. He has people who watch. Yes, he said. He will. He held her gaze. But right now he thinks you're alone. He thinks you're afraid. He thinks you're one bad season from a desperate sale. He paused. He doesn't know about Martha. He doesn't know you've seen the survey maps. And he doesn't know... He stopped. Something crossed his face that was quieter, more deliberate. He doesn't know that you are not in fact alone. She looked at him across the table with the maps between them and the evening coming down outside. Why are you doing this? She said. It was the second time she had asked him something like this, and he knew it, and she saw him decide to give her a different answer than the one he had given before. Because 6 years ago, he said, I watched a man do to my mother's land what Brooks is trying to do to yours. Different territory, same method. She was a widow. She was isolated. She had no one who knew what was happening until it was too late. He held her gaze evenly. I couldn't help her. I was young, and I didn't understand what I was seeing until the sale was done. A pause. I understand it now. Evelyn held his gaze. She had not expected that. She had been prepared for something noble and general, because it's right, because I can, because you deserve help. She had not been prepared for the specific quiet weight of a real story. A real loss. The kind that changed how a person moved through the world. I'm sorry, she said. About your mother's land. She died the year after, he said. Not from that, just from time. But she never spoke of it again either. I think... He stopped. I think losing it took something from her that she couldn't get back. The kitchen was very still. That will not happen here, Evelyn said. It was not a question. It was not a reassurance for his benefit. It was simply a statement of what was going to be true. Caleb looked at her for a moment. No, he said. It will not. 2 days later, Nathaniel Brooks came to the farm himself. She was in the yard when she heard the horse, and she turned, and she recognized him immediately. Portly, well-dressed for a ranch territory, the particular air of a man who expected to be received. He dismounted at the gate with the ease of someone who had done it many times, though she had never seen him at this gate before. He walked up the path with his hat in his hand and a pleasant expression. Miss Hartwell, he said, I hope I'm not interrupting. Mr. Brooks, she said. She did not invite him in. She did not move from where she was standing. What can I do for you? He spread his hands in a gesture of openness. I've been hearing some talk around town, he said. About some concerns you might have. About your land, about water rights. He shook his head, the picture of concerned neighborliness. I just wanted to come by personally and make sure there wasn't any misunderstanding between us. She looked at him steadily. What sort of misunderstanding? Well, he said, I've made you a couple of offers over the years, in good faith as one neighbor to another, and I've heard some suggestion that you might have taken those the wrong way. Seen them as well as something other than what they were. He smiled. I just want you to know any offer I've made, it's been because I wanted to help. You're a young woman managing a significant operation alone, and I've always had the greatest respect for your father. Mr. Brooks, she said. He stopped. I didn't misunderstand your offers, she said. I understood them perfectly, both times. She held his gaze. And my answer is still no. The pleasant expression did not leave his face, but something behind it shifted. A recalibration. He had come here expecting to find her cautious, perhaps anxious, perhaps angling toward a negotiation. He had not come expecting to her, standing in her yard, with the particular stillness of someone who holds all the cards and has simply been waiting for the right moment to show them. "I see," he said. His voice was still smooth. "Well, I suppose I'll just have to respect that." "Yes," she said. "You will." A pause. He looked at her, assessing now, the neighborliness gone thinner, a real measurement happening behind his eyes. "You've had company lately," he said. Casual, light. "That new fellow Dawson. People have noticed." "People notice everything in a small town," she said. "They do," he agreed. "And they talk. I'd hate to see any talk hurt your reputation further." He paused. "You understand. As someone who genuinely wants to see you well." She let the silence sit for exactly long enough to be deliberate. Then she said, "Mr. Brooks, I'm going to tell you something and I want you to hear it clearly." He waited. "I know about the rail survey," she said. "I know about the approval in January. I know what the eastern 30 acres of my land will be worth when that line goes through." She held his gaze without blinking. "And I know that you have known all of this considerably longer than I have." Something happened to his face. Not much. Not enough for anyone watching from a distance to name it. But she was not watching from a distance. She was standing 3 feet from him in the summer morning, and she saw it, the flicker, the recalculation, the first real uncertainty she had ever put into Nathaniel Brooks's expression. "I don't know what you think you've heard," he said. His voice was still smooth, but it was working harder now. "I don't think I've heard anything," she said. "I know what I've documented." She looked at him steadily. "Good day, Mr. Brooks." He stood for a moment longer, looked at her with something that was no longer neighborly and no longer pretending to be. Then he put his hat back on, turned, and walked back to his horse. She watched him go. She did not move until he had ridden off the property and back toward the main road. Then she released a slow, careful breath and turned back to the work she had been doing before he arrived. Her hands were perfectly steady. She realized, not afraid of Nathaniel Brooks. She was angry. And anger, clean-focused, purposeful anger, was something she knew how to use. She went back inside, sat at her desk, and began to write. She wrote down everything, every offer, every date, every piece of information. Caleb had found Martha's testimony, written out in full, the survey documentation, the timeline. She wrote it all in the careful, precise hand her father had taught her, the same hand she used for the ledgers, the same hand that had kept this farm alive when everything else was failing. When she finished, she read it over once. Then she folded it, sealed it, addressed it to the county land commissioner in Helena, and set it aside to go with the morning stage. She sat back. Outside, the summer evening was settling over the land. Her land. Every fence post, every acre, every dry and stubborn inch of it hers. And it would still be hers when September came, and the survey team arrived, and the truth of what Nathaniel Brooks had done spread out into the light where everyone could see it. She thought about Caleb saying, "You are not alone." She thought about Martha walking to her door. She thought about her father who had died owing nothing to no one, and what he had always told her when the town made her feel too large for the space it had assigned her. "You are exactly the right size, Evelyn. The world will catch up eventually." She picked up the letter. She was going to make sure it did. The letter went out on the morning stage. Evelyn watched it go from the post office step, and then she went home and got back to work, because waiting was not something she did well, and work was the only honest answer to it. She fed the stock. She checked the fence line on the south pasture. She wrote out her ledgers for the week with the same clean precision she always did, and she did not let herself think too hard about what happened next, because thinking too hard about what happened next was how a person lost their nerve. But she knew in the way. You know a storm is coming before you can see it, that the sending of that letter had changed something. You did not put your name on paper and send it to a county commissioner without consequences. You did not call Nathaniel Brooks out, by implication in writing to an authority with the power to investigate without that man finding out. And Brooks would find out. He had people everywhere. He had been building his web in Willow Creek for 30 years, and it was thick and it was wide, and she had just walked deliberately into the center of it. 3 days passed. Quiet days, too quiet, the kind that made the back of her neck prickle. Then the drought hit. It did not come gradually the way droughts were supposed to. It came in one brutal week of heat so savage and relentless that the creek dropped 4 inches, and the cattle grew restless, and the dust rose off the fields in pale sheets that coated every surface it touched. The well on the Hennessy farm, 3 miles north, went dry on a Tuesday. The Pratt family lost their kitchen garden by Wednesday. By Thursday, there were men standing in front of the general store, talking in low, tight voices about water rights and shared sources, and what to do if the main creek dropped much further. Evelyn knew what to do. She had known for 2 years, ever since she had found, while going through her father's papers the winter after he died, a set of old hand-drawn maps that predated the formal county survey by at least a decade. Her father had been a meticulous man. He had kept everything. And among the deeds and the letters and the old-school lesson plans, there were maps drawn by the original settlers who had first come through the valley. Maps that showed in faded, careful ink the location of springs and underground water channels that no official record had ever noted. There was one in particular, an old irrigation channel hand-dug by the first families who had settled the eastern side of the valley that had been abandoned when the main creek was high enough not to need it. It ran from a spring on the high eastern ridge all the way down through the valley floor. Her father had marked it in red. Beside it in his handwriting, viable if cleared, approximately 3 days' work. She had not told anyone about it. There had been no reason to when the creek was running well. There was reason now. She brought the maps to Caleb on Thursday evening. He spread them on his own kitchen table and studied them for a long time without speaking. She watched him trace the line of the old channel with his finger, calculating the grade and the distance and the work it would take. 3 days, he said. That's what my father estimated. Your father never moved a ditch in his life, Caleb said, not unkindly. It'll take more than 3 days if the channel's silted over. Could be a week. He looked up. But it's possible. It's possible, she agreed. The question is whether anyone will believe it's possible before they believe the other option. He looked at her. What's the other option? Brooks, she said. He owns the only deep well in the eastern quarter. I've heard from Martha that he's been making offers water access for a price to the farms that are struggling. Quiet offers, private ones. She paused. By next week, if this keeps up, half the valley is going to be dependent on Nathaniel Brooks for water. And he is going to make absolutely certain they remember that when September comes and the rail survey goes public. Caleb sat back. He planned for the drought, he said. I don't think he made it happen, she said. But I think he was ready for it. He's been ready for it for a long time. She looked at the maps. He wants to be the man who saved Willow Creek from the drought. He wants to be so essential, so necessary, that when a letter arrives from the county commissioner's office asking about his land dealings, the whole town looks the other way. The silence held for a moment. Then we move first, Caleb said. Yes, she said. We do. She went to the town meeting on Friday. It was not a formal meeting. Nothing in Willow Creek was ever entirely formal. It was the gathering that happened naturally at the feed store, when enough men were worried enough to stop pretending they weren't, and someone put out word, and they all came in out of the heat and stood around with their hats in their hands, trying to look like they had solutions, when what they actually had was fear. Evelyn walked in, and the room did what it always did when she walked in, absorbed the fact of her presence with a slight adjustment, like a body of water shifting to accommodate a stone. Men looked and then looked away. A few nodded. Most waited to see what she would do. She walked to the front of the room. This was the thing that most people in Willow Creek had never quite gotten used to. Evelyn Hartwell did not wait to be invited. She had learned the hard way that waiting to be invited was the same as waiting for something that was never going to come, and she did not have time for that. I have something to show you, she said. The room was not expecting that. It went from restless to quiet in about 4 seconds. She unrolled the maps on the long feed table at the front of the room. These are the original settler maps for this valley, she said. My father kept them. They show a hand-dug irrigation channel that runs from the eastern spring all the way down through the valley floor. It's been silted over for 30 years, but the source is still running. I checked it myself last spring. She looked at the men around the table. If we clear that channel, this valley has water. Not Brooks's well. Not the main creek. Our water. The water our grandfathers put here. The room was still processing this when a voice came from the back. And what gives you the right to decide that? It was Tom Aldridge, the first name in her notebook, the man who had said she talked too much at dinner. He was looking at her with the expression he always had when she was in a room where he thought she shouldn't be. Those maps could be wrong. You could be wrong. We'd be spending a week of labor we can't afford on your say-so. You'd be spending a week of labor, she said, or you'd be spending the next month paying Nathaniel Brooks for well access and hoping he stays generous. She looked at Aldridge steadily. You pick. Someone in the middle of the room made the sound that was almost a laugh. Aldridge's face went red. Now that's not Tom. The voice was Caleb's. He had come in behind her. She had not asked him to. He had simply appeared at the door at the right moment and walked to the front and stood beside her in a way that said everything it needed to say without a word. Let her finish. Aldridge looked at Caleb, then at Evelyn, then at the maps. He sat down. Evelyn continued. She walked them through the maps, the channel route, the spring source, the estimated work. She was clear, and she was methodical, and she did not apologize for any of it. And the room which had come in looking for someone to tell them what to do, slowly, grudgingly, unmistakably, began to listen. By the end, 3 men had volunteered to ride out with her to inspect the channel head. By the time they left the feed store, it was 5. She did not look at Tom Aldridge when she walked past him. She did not need to. The channel head was exactly where the map said it would be, and the spring was running thin from the drought, but running a clean thread of water pushing against the dry summer earth, with the stubborn persistence of something that had been there a very long time and intended to keep being there. The 5 men who rode out with her stood and looked at it, and no one said anything for a moment. Then Daniel Pratt, who had lost his kitchen garden 2 days ago, and whose face had the particular drawn quality of a man who had not slept well, crouched down and put his hand in the water and held it there. Lord, he said quietly. We'll need shovels, one of the other men said. Pickaxes. It'll be hard going in this heat. I've got tools, Caleb said. I've got the 2 men who work my land. We can start tomorrow morning. My boys can come, Pratt said. He stood up. His eyes were wet, but he was not crying exactly. He was just a man who had been very close to losing something important and had just been shown a door that he had not known was there. He looked at Evelyn. How did you know about the maps? My father kept everything, she said. I just read it. Pratt nodded. Said nothing more. But the way he looked at her was different from how men in Willow Creek usually looked at her. It was not the look of someone deciding what category she belonged in. It was the look of someone who had just revised a category they had not realized they were using. She filed it away. She did not say anything about it. She had work to do. They started at first light Saturday morning. The channel had 4 decades of silt and root growth packed into it, and clearing it was hard, slow, miserable work in a heat that did not let up even in the early morning. Evelyn worked beside them. She had brought her own tools, and she used them, and no one said anything about that, partly because there was no time for it, and partly because watching Evelyn Hartwell work a ditch with the same quiet efficiency she applied to everything else had a way of making the usual objections seem petty. By midday Saturday, they had cleared 150 yards. By Sunday morning, word had spread, and 4 more men arrived. Then 6. By Sunday afternoon, 17 people were working the channel, men and women, both because the women of Willow Creek had their own relationship with drought and with the fear of watching a season fail, and when the men started leaving for the eastern ridge with shovels, several of them simply picked up tools and followed. Martha Greer was among them. She arrived on Sunday with her 2 grown sons and a determination she wore on her face like something newly discovered. She worked beside Evelyn for 3 hours, and they did not talk much because the work required most of their breath. But at one point, Martha looked over and said, "You were right, about wasting courage." Evelyn looked at her. You said you wouldn't waste it, Martha said. You coming here. She gestured at the channel, the workers, the thin line of water beginning to move through the newly cleared section. You didn't. Evelyn said, neither did you. Martha straightened up and went back to work. But her face had changed in the way faces changed when a person decided finally, and without reservation, whose side they were on. On Sunday evening, as the light went long and golden, and the first real trickle of water was moving through the upper section of the channel, Nathaniel Brooks rowed out to see what was happening. He did not come alone. He brought Hector Vane and 2 other men, and he rowed up to the edge of the worksite with the expression of a man who has arrived at a problem he expected to be much smaller. He looked at the channel, at the workers, at the thin running water. He looked at Evelyn. She straightened up and looked back at him without moving from where she was standing. Miss Hartwell, he said. His voice was pleasant. It was always pleasant. This is quite an undertaking. It is, she said. I wonder if you've had anyone look at the water rights for this spring, he said. These old channels there can be some complicated questions of ownership. The work around them had not exactly stopped, but it had slowed. People were listening. He knew they were listening. That was why he had said it. Evelyn looked at him. There are no complicated questions, she said. The spring rises on federal land. The channel was dug by the original settler families of this valley. Every man and woman working here today is a descendant or legal successor of those families. The water belongs to the valley. She paused. I've documented it. If you'd like to dispute it, I'd be glad to have that conversation in front of the county land commissioner. Something moved behind his eyes. Fast. Gone. I'm sure there's no need for that, he said pleasantly. I'm sure there isn't, she said. He looked at her for another moment. At the channel. At the 17 people who had stopped even pretending to work and were now simply standing and watching him. He tipped his hat. Good evening, Miss Hartwell. He rode away. The moment he was out of earshot, Daniel Pratt said loudly, well, that was something. Someone else laughed. It was a tired laugh, the kind that comes at the end of a very long day, but it was real. Evelyn turned back to the channel and picked up her shovel. Keep working, she said. We lose the light in 2 hours. They kept working. The water reached the valley floor on Tuesday afternoon. It was not a rush, not a dramatic surge. It was the slow, steady, inevitable movement of water, finding its way through a cleared path, working through the last packed section of silt, and then spreading into the wider channel below, and beginning to flow thin at first, then stronger, finding its grade, settling into the route it had been made to take. Daniel Pratt's youngest boy saw it first, and let out a sound that was not quite a word. By the time Evelyn got there, 4 people were already standing at the valley end of the channel watching the water come. She stood and watched it with them. She did not cry. She did not need to. She simply watched the water move and felt something she had no clean name for, something that was not triumph exactly, but was adjacent to it. The deep grounded satisfaction of a thing done correctly that needed to be done. Caleb came to stand beside her. He did not say anything for a moment. They stood and watched the water together. Then he said quietly, Your father would have been glad to see this. She did not answer right away. She felt the words land, and she let them land, and she did not do anything to manage the feeling that came with them. Yes, she said finally. He would have. A beat passed. The commissioner's office sent a reply, Caleb said. I picked it up at the post office this morning. She turned to look at him. They're sending an investigator, he said. He'll arrive before the September survey. He wants to speak with you and with any witnesses to the land dealings. He paused. They took it seriously, Evelyn. She held his gaze. They took it seriously, she repeated. Yes. She looked back at the water. She had written that letter in her father's hand, in the careful, precise script he had taught her, with the same quiet stubbornness that had kept this farm alive through drought and grief and 7 men who decided she was too much. She had sent, not knowing if it would reach anyone who cared, not knowing if her name on a piece of paper carried enough weight to matter, not knowing anything except that she was not going to be silent, and she was not going to be small, and she was not going to let Nathaniel Brooks take the one thing that connected her to every version of herself that had ever mattered. And it had been enough. She breathed. "How long do we have?" she asked. 3 weeks, Caleb said. "Maybe 4. "That's enough time," she said. "For what?" She turned to look at him. And for the first time, the absolute first time since the stockyard, since the notebook, since every careful and deliberate and self-protective step she had taken in his direction, she let the wall come down completely. Not the wall that kept her standing. That one she intended to keep forever. But the other wall, the one she had built specifically to keep people at exactly the right distance, so they could not see how much she was carrying, or how long she had been carrying it alone. She let it down. To make sure that when that investigator arrives, she said, every person in this valley who has been paying attention knows exactly what Nathaniel Brooks has been doing, and why. She paused. And to make sure they also know who found the water. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "You're going to make him fight you in public," he said. "I'm going to make him answer in public," she said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes," she said. "A fight implies I have something to lose." She held his gaze. "I don't. He does." Caleb was quiet. Then something crossed his face. Something open and uncomplicated and wholly genuine, something she had not quite seen there before, in exactly that form. "I have never," he said, "met anyone quite like you." She held his gaze. She did not deflect. She did not minimize it. "I know," she said quietly. "Neither have I." A beat, long and still and full. "The water's going to need monitoring tonight," she said. "The upper section could silt back if no one checks the grade." "I'll do it," he said. "We'll do it," she said. He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "We will." They did not know, standing at the valley end of the channel, while the water found its way and the long summer evening settled around them, that Nathaniel Brooks had already made his next move. He had made it that morning before the water reached the valley. Before the commissioner's reply arrived at the post office, before Evelyn said, "I don't have something to lose, he does." He had made it quietly in the back office of the bank, in a conversation with a man named Arthur Cade, the manager of the only lending institution within 40 miles of Willow Creek. Brooks had done business with Cade for 20 years. He called in that history on Tuesday morning in a conversation that lasted 20 minutes and concerned specifically a small outstanding note on the Hartwell property. A debt Evelyn's father had taken out during the hard winter 3 years before his death, paid down to almost nothing, one final installment remaining. Cade had until that morning intended to simply roll the note forward as a courtesy. The amount was small. Evelyn was a reliable, conscientious account holder. There was no reason to press it. Brooks gave him a reason. He did not threaten. He never threatened. He simply reminded Cade of a certain business arrangement they had discussed 2 years ago, of a favor Cade had asked for and received, and of the natural expectations that accompanied such arrangements. He said these things pleasantly over good coffee, in the easy tone of men who understood each other. By the time he left, the matter was arranged. The notice would go to Evelyn Hartwell by the end of the week. Full payment of the remaining note immediately. Within 30 days, or the bank would exercise its right to place a lien on the property pending repayment. It was not the land. It was not enough to take the land. But it was enough if the amount was large enough. If the timing was right, if she was already stretched thin by the drought and the channel work, and the cost of everything else to put her in a position where she needed cash immediately. And if she needed cash immediately, and the only buyer in the territory with that kind of cash on hand was Nathaniel Brooks. It was a good plan. He was very good at plans. The notice arrived Friday. Evelyn read it at the kitchen table on a Friday morning with her coffee going cold beside her, and she read it twice to make sure she had it right, and then she set it down very carefully on the table and sat for a moment. The amount was not catastrophic. In another year, in a normal season, she could have managed it without difficulty. But this was not a normal season. The drought had cut into her operating reserves. The channel work had cost labor and time she had not budgeted for. The cattle sale she had been planning for September had not happened yet, and 30 days was not enough time to move stock and collect payment and get it to the bank. She picked up the notice and looked at it again. 30 days. She thought about Brooks in the bank in the back office. She did not know that was where it had come from. Not yet, but she felt it with the certainty of someone who had been paying attention for a long time to how Nathaniel Brooks moved through the world. She had 3 options. She could scramble to find the money in 30 days, which would stretch her to a place she had not been since the worst year after her father died. She could go to Brooks and ask for time, which was exactly what he wanted and which she was not going to do if there was any other path. Or she could find another way. She sat at the table for 10 minutes. Then she stood up, put on her hat, and walked to Caleb's land. It was the first time she had come to him. Every other time, it had been him coming to her, appearing at the gate at the barn at the well. She had maintained that distance without quite deciding to out of the same careful habit that had kept her standing alone for 5 years. Coming to him meant something. She knew it. She came anyway because the particular arithmetic of pride versus necessity had worked itself out in her head on the walk over, and necessity had won, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. Howe was in the yard when she arrived. He took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" She told him. He read the notice when she handed it to him. His expression did not change in the obvious ways. He did not flush or harden or make the tight performative show of anger that most men made when they wanted you to know they were on your side. He simply read it carefully all the way through, and when he looked up, his eyes were very clear. "This came from Brooks," he said. "I believe so," she said. "I can't prove it, but I believe it." "Cade at the bank," Caleb said. "He and Brooks go back a long way." He looked at the notice again. "This is the last card he has that doesn't require going to court. If he can force a lien on the property before the investigator arrives, he doesn't even need to complete the lien," she said. "He just needs me to be desperate enough to sell before September." She looked at him steadily. He underestimated how much time he had. The investigators coming sooner than he expected. Caleb nodded. He was thinking. She could see it. "How much is the note?" he asked. She told him. He was quiet for a moment. "I have it," he said. She stared at him. "I've been saving for a second parcel of land," he said. "I'd rather use it for this." He met her gaze. "It's a loan, Evelyn, not charity. You'll pay me back from the September cattle sale at fair terms on paper witnessed and signed." He paused. "But you don't have to scramble for 30 days, and you don't have to go to Brooks." She looked at him for a long moment. Every instinct she had built over 5 years of self-sufficiency was objecting. Every hard-won reflex of independence was pulling her toward "No, I'll find another way." But there was no other way. Not in 30 days. And she knew she had always known, she had just never had the occasion to know it this concretely, that self-sufficiency was not the same thing as refusing help from people who had earned the right to offer it. "On paper," she said. "Fair terms, full repayment in October." "Yes," he said. "I need to think about the interest rate." The corner of his mouth moved. "You're negotiating loan terms with me." "I negotiate everything," she said. He almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am. You do." She breathed, steadied. "All right," she said. "Yes. Thank you." He nodded, businesslike, as though they had just agreed on a feed price, but she saw his hands relax, a small, involuntary release of tension. She recognized as the kind of thing a person did when they had been holding something carefully for a long time and had finally been allowed to set it down. He had wanted to help her. He had been waiting to be allowed to help her. And she had finally, after 5 weeks of careful distance and careful pride and careful independence, let him. "I'll draw up the paper tonight," he said. "Good," she said. She turned to go. "Evelyn." She turned back. He was looking at her with that steady, watchful expression, the one she had never quite found a name for, the one that had been there since the stockyard and had never once wavered. "He threw everything he had at you this week," Caleb said. "The drought, the well, the channel work, now this." He paused. "He's running out of room." She held his gaze. "Good," she said, and she walked back down the road toward her land. Hers fully and completely, 30 days from now, and for every day after that. Behind her, the sound of Caleb moving back to his work settled into the quiet of the summer afternoon, and the distance between them felt for the first time like the comfortable distance of two people who were building something together, rather than the careful distance of two people who were afraid to come too close. She walked home, and she did not look back, but she was smiling. The loan papers were signed on a Saturday morning, witnessed by Franklin at the depot, who read every line twice, with the careful attention of a man who understood that paper outlasted people, and that some documents deserved more than a glance. He handed the pen back to Evelyn when she was done and said, "Your father would have liked this young man." Evelyn looked at Franklin, then at Caleb, who was folding his copy of the agreement with the same businesslike composure he applied to everything. "He would have argued with him about cattle prices," she said. Franklin laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere deep and genuine. "Yes," he said. "He would have. And he'd have lost, and he'd have respected the man for it." She paid the banknote that same afternoon. She walked into Cade's office and set the full amount on his desk in cash and waited while he counted it and wrote the receipt and stamped it with the bank seal. Cade did not look at her the entire time. He looked at the money at the receipt at the edge of his desk. When he slid the receipt across to her, his hand was not entirely steady. She picked up the receipt and looked at it. "I'd like a letter," she said, "confirming the note is paid in full and the property carries no encumbrances." Cade looked up. "That's not standard." "I'd like it nonetheless," she said. "Today." He wrote it. He stamped it. He handed it across the desk without meeting her eyes. She thanked him politely and left. On the front step of the bank, she stopped and read the letter through once carefully. Then she folded it and put it in her apron pocket alongside the notebook. The notebook that had 7 names in it and 5 years of careful, stubborn survival written in the margins. She stood there for a moment in the summer heat. Then she went home. The investigator arrived on a Wednesday, 11 days before the rail survey team was due, which was sooner than expected, and which told Evelyn when Caleb brought her the news that whoever had read her letter in the commissioner's office had read it carefully and had found something in it worth moving quickly for. His name was George Alderman. He came on the morning stage from Helena, a lean man in his 50s, with a gray mustache, and the particular quality of stillness that belonged to people who had spent decades listening to other people's disputes, and had learned that the less they revealed, the more they heard. He checked into the single boarding house Willow Creek possessed, and spent his first afternoon simply walking the town, visiting the general store, the feed office, the land registry, asking questions that sounded casual and were not. Evelyn did not go to him first. She had made that decision deliberately. She was not going to appear anxious. She was not going to appear to be pursuing this. She was going to be exactly what she was, a landowner with documented evidence of a sustained, deliberate effort to defraud her of property. And she was going to let George Alderman come to her when he was ready. He came on Thursday morning. He knocked at her gate at 9 o'clock, hat in hand, and introduced himself with the measured courtesy of a man who did not waste words on ceremony. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "I've been sent by the county land commissioner in response to your letter. I'd like to hear what you have to say if you're willing." "Come in," she said. "I'll put coffee on." She had spent 3 days organizing everything. Every document, every date, every piece of evidence laid out in the clean, logical sequence her father had taught her. Begin with what you can prove, move to what you can corroborate, close with what the evidence compels. The deed records. The survey map with the rail corridor. The timeline of Brooks's offers against the timeline of the survey approval. Martha's written testimony signed and dated. The bank notice and the paid receipt. The record of Brooks's approach to Caleb written in Caleb's own hand and signed. Alderman sat at her kitchen table and read every page. He read the way she had learned to watch, for not scanning, not skimming, but actually reading, going back to cross-reference dates, pausing over details that connected to other details. He asked 3 questions during the first hour. All of them specific. All of them the questions of a man who already understood the shape of what he was looking at and was confirming the dimensions. When he finished, he set the last page down and looked at her. "You've been thorough," he said. "My father was a teacher," she said. He believed that clarity was a form of respect. Alderman looked at the documents. The survey approval date against the first offer, that's the hinge. Yes, she said. He knew the land would triple in value. He made the offers before the approval was public. If I had sold at either offered price, I would have transferred the property for less than a third of its coming worth to a man who already knew what it was going to be worth. And the banknote. Kate at the bank has done business with Brooks for 20 years, she said. The note had been rolling forward as a courtesy for 2 years. The week after I sent my letter to your office, the bank demanded immediate full payment. She met his gaze. I cannot prove that Brooks directed that, but the timing is not coincidental. Alderman looked at her for a moment. You paid it? Yes. Where did you find the funds on short notice? A private loan, she said. Properly documented, witnessed, and signed. I can show you that paperwork as well if it's relevant. He nodded slowly. It may be. He sat back slightly. Miss Hartwell, I want to be direct with you. What you've documented here is a pattern, a sustained, deliberate pattern of manipulation, designed to create conditions for a coerced sale. Whether it rises to the level of criminal fraud depends on evidence of explicit intent, which is always the difficult piece. He paused. But the pattern itself is significant, and the fact that it was conducted against a woman managing property alone, using the social pressure of this community as an instrument, that is something the commissioner's office takes seriously. She held his gaze. She had not expected him to name it so plainly. She had expected more careful, administrative language. The directness surprised her, and she did not show it. What happens next? She asked. I speak to other people, he said. The witness you've documented, the bank manager, several of the other landowners along the survey corridor to see if Brooks has made similar approaches elsewhere. He paused. And I speak to Brooks himself. He'll be charming, she said. They usually are, Alderman said. Something in his expression shifted, not quite a smile, but the acknowledgement of one. 30 years in this work, Miss Hartwell. I have heard charming men explain away a great deal. It gets easier to hear what's underneath it. She breathed. Is there anything else you need from me? She asked. Not today. He gathered the documents carefully, making notes as he went. I may have questions once I've spoken with the others. I'd like you available through the end of the week. I'm not going anywhere, she said. He stood and picked up his hat. At the door he paused. One more thing, he said. The irrigation channel. The one you organized the clearing of. He looked at her. Several people I spoke with yesterday mentioned it. Unprompted. She waited. They mentioned it the way people mention something they didn't expect, he said. Something that changed how they saw a situation. He held her gaze briefly. I thought you should know that. He left. She stood in her kitchen for a moment after he was gone, the summer morning coming through the window and the documents still laid out on the table. Then she sat down, picked up her pen, and began writing the list of additional details she had thought of in the past 3 days that she had not included in the initial letter. Because thoroughness was a form of respect, and she was not done yet. Nathaniel Brooks found out about Alderman before noon. Of course he did. He had people everywhere. He had been building his web for 30 years, and it was not going to come apart simply because a government man showed up with a notepad. He had survived scrutiny before. He had survived questions and rumors, and the kind of talk that occasionally circulated about successful men who made the sort of decisions that uncomfortable people sometimes second-guessed. He was good at surviving. I was in his office when Hector Vane brought him the news, and he listened without any visible reaction, and then sent Vane out and sat alone for a few minutes. I thought about Evelyn Hartwell standing in her yard saying, I know about the rail survey. He thought about the expression on her face, not fear, not desperation, not the particular quality of a woman who was running out of options. Something else. Something that had been bothering him since that moment in a way he had not admitted to himself. She had not been running out of options. She had been opening them. He had been so certain she was alone. He had spent 6 years building toward that certainty, tending it carefully, and he had not anticipated the cowboy from Wyoming, and he had not anticipated Martha Greer, and he had not anticipated that the irrigation channel would do what it had done to the way this town looked at her. He had built his advantage on the assumption that Evelyn Hartwell would be by now exactly what the town had always expected her to be. Her to be isolated, diminished, quietly desperate. She was none of those things. He sat in his office, and he thought about this, and then he made a decision. I was going to talk to Alderman himself. Not because he was afraid he was not afraid, or he told himself he was not afraid, but because the best way to manage a situation like this was to be present in it, to be visible. To be the reasonable, civic-minded man, he had always been the one who had built this community and supported this community and given more to this community than anyone else in it. He was not going to hide in his office while some government investigator formed impressions based on what Evelyn Hartwell had put in a letter. He called for his horse. Alderman met with Brooks that same afternoon in the single room of the boarding house that served as a sitting area with 2 chairs and a small table between them and the sounds of the town coming in through the open window. Brooks was everything Evelyn had said he would be. Warm, open, generous with his time. Concerned, genuinely concerned, he said, about any misunderstanding that might have arisen from his perfectly straightforward business dealings. He was sorry if Miss Hartwell had felt pressured. That had never been his intent. He had the greatest respect for her and for her father's memory. He had simply been trying to offer help to a young woman in a difficult situation. Alderman listened to all of it. He asked at one point about the timing of the banknote. Brooks expressed surprise. He had nothing to do with that. Cade managed his own bank. He certainly would never interfere in another man's business dealings. Alderman wrote something in his notebook and asked about the survey approval. Brooks said he had heard vague talk of a potential rail line. Nothing official. Certainly nothing that had influenced his offer to purchase the Hartwell parcel. Alderman wrote something else. Mr. Brooks, he said, would you be willing to provide documentation of when exactly you first became aware of the rail survey approval? A pause, small, managed, but there. I'm not sure I have that to hand, Brooks said. I'd have to look. Of course, Alderman said pleasantly. I'll need it by the end of the week. Brooks left the meeting, still smooth, still composed, still the picture of a man who had nothing to be concerned about. But something had happened in that small room with the government man and his notebook, and he felt it as he rode back through town. A shift in the weight of things. A sense that the ground he had been standing on for 30 years was not quite as solid as it had been that morning. He did not like that feeling. He was not accustomed to it. He rode past the general store and the feed office and the church and the homes of men and women who had been nodding to him for 30 years, and he rode past the stockyard where Evelyn Hartwell had handed a stranger her notebook and started something Brooks had not had the sense to stop when he could have, and he told himself he had more resources than she did, and more allies, and more history, and more standing, and all of that was true. But he was a man who was good at calculating odds, and the odds had shifted. The shift became visible on Friday. It was market day, which meant the main street was full, and the conversations that happened were the ones that mattered, the ones that formed opinion, that settled impressions, that decided how the community understood itself and its members. Brooks had always understood the importance of market day. He had always been visible on market days, present and accessible and generous with his time and his handshake. He was there on Friday, but so was Evelyn Hartwell. She was not doing anything dramatic. She was simply present at the dry goods store, at the feed office, at the small gathering near the water trough, where half a dozen farmers were talking about the irrigation channel and what it had meant for the week's water situation. She moved through the market with the same quiet, purposeful efficiency she brought to everything, and she spoke to people who had not spoken to her in years, and they spoke back. Not all of them, not most of them, not yet, but enough. Daniel Pratt stopped her near the feed store and thanked her plainly and publicly for the channel. His 2 boys were with him, and they stood a little straighter when he said it, the way young people stand when they are watching an adult do something they recognize as right. One of the Hennessy brothers, whose well had gone dry first, who had been among the most vocal skeptics at the feed store meeting, crossed the street specifically to shake her hand. Martha Greer walked beside her for half a block, and their conversation was easy and unremarkable in its ease, which was itself remarkable in a town where Evelyn Hartwell's social interactions had been for 5 years anything but easy. Brooks watched this from in front of the barber shop. He watched it with the particular attention of a man who had spent decades understanding how towns work, how opinion moved, how the weight of a community shifted. And what he saw was not a dramatic reversal. It was not the town suddenly and completely turning toward Evelyn Hartwell. It was something subtler, something that in some ways was more significant. It was the beginning of a question. The town was beginning to ask a question. It had not asked before, not loudly, not openly, but in the private space of individuals, looking at what had happened in the past 2 weeks, and revising slowly and reluctantly, but genuinely the story they had been told. The story about Evelyn Hartwell, that had been such a neat, settled, comfortable story for so long. What if the story was wrong? Brooks felt that question like a change in the weather. He had built 30 years on the town's certainty about certain things, and certainty was only as good as the story that held it together, and the story was beginning to develop cracks. He needed to act. He needed to act now before the cracks widened. Before Alderman finished his conversations and wrote his report, and before the rail survey went public, and before Evelyn Hartwell's documentation became the official record of what he had done. He had one card left. He had been saving it, not because he needed it, but because he preferred not to use it. It was messy, and Brooks did not like messy. But he was running out of room, and a man running out of room did not have the luxury of preferring clean. He went to find Tom Aldridge. Aldridge was not a bad man. Evelyn had never thought of him that way, not even when she was writing his name in the notebook. He was a small man in the ways that mattered most, the ways that had nothing to do with height or money or standing. But he was not bad. He was simply the kind of man who had built his sense of himself on certain beliefs about the right order of things, and when those beliefs were threatened, he became unreliable in the way of people who cannot tolerate uncertainty. Brooks knew that. He had known it for years. He knew exactly what to say to Tom Aldridge and how to say it, and he said it that Friday afternoon in the feed store back office quietly, one neighbor to another, the way he said most things. He said that he was worried, that a government investigator had come to town because of accusations made by a woman who had always been frankly difficult, that her accusations were unfounded, but that investigations had a way of creating impressions regardless of their merit, and that the impression being created that Brooks had been some kind of predatory figure in this community was unfair not just to him, but to the whole town, because it implied that Willow Creek was the kind of place where such things could happen. He said he needed people who knew the truth to say so. People who had known Evelyn Hartwell for years and could speak honestly about her character, about the incidents, about the patterns of behavior that made her claims suspect. He looked at Aldridge. Aldridge looked at his hands. "I don't know that I'd call any of it incidents," Aldridge said slowly. She's a difficult woman. You know how she is." "I do," Brooks said. "And I think Alderman should hear that from someone who's known her for years. Not from me, I have an obvious interest, but from a neighbor, a community member." He paused. "Someone whose word carries weight." Aldridge was quiet for a moment. "What exactly would I say?" he asked. And there it was, the moment that would have gone differently if Aldridge had been a different kind of man, if he had asked himself first what was true rather than what was convenient. But he was not a different kind of man, and he did not ask himself that. And Brooks told him what to say in the gentle, reasonable voice of a man who had been doing exactly this for 30 years. Evelyn did not know about the conversation in the feed store back office, not yet. What she knew on Friday evening was that the day had felt different, that the market had felt different, that something in the way people looked at her, not all of them, not most, but enough had shifted by a degree she had not experienced in 5 years, and it was both more and less than she had expected. More because she had not let herself hope for it. Less because hope once admitted was always larger than the thing it hoped for. She was on the porch when Caleb arrived. He had been in town for part of the day, and he came to the farm in the early evening with his hat in his hand, and an expression she read immediately as someone carrying news they were deciding how to deliver. "Tell me plainly," she said. He sat down on the steps, looked at the land for a moment. "Aldridge went to see Alderman this afternoon," he said. I heard it from Franklin, who heard it from the woman at the boarding house." He paused. "He told Alderman that you had a history of making unfounded accusations against the men of this community. That the men who ended their courtships with you did so because of specific behaviors that concerned them. That your claim against Brooks was consistent with a pattern of—" He stopped. His word was vindictiveness. The porch was very quiet. Evelyn looked at the land. "Aldridge," she said. "Yes." She breathed in, breathed out. "Brooks got to him," she said. It was not a question. "Almost certainly." Caleb looked at her. "Alderman isn't going to take Aldridge's word as the deciding factor. He's a good investigator, but it muddies the water, and Brooks knows it." He paused. "It's designed to make Alderman spend time on your character instead of on the documents." She was quiet for a long moment. "Brooks is very good at this," she said. "Yes," Caleb said. "He is. But he made a mistake." Caleb looked at her. "What mistake?" She turned to face him. "Aldridge was the first name in the notebook," she said. "I have a record of every conversation we had during the time he was courting me. My father and I had a habit he kept a daily journal, and I did too from the time I was 14. I wrote down what people said, and what happened, and what I observed." She held Caleb's gaze. "I have entries from the entire period of each of those 7 courtships, dated, specific, in my own handwriting from the time not written afterward." She paused. "If Aldridge is going to make claims about my behavior during that period, I have a contemporaneous record of exactly what happened." Caleb stared at her. "You've kept journals since you were 14, he said. "My father believed that observation was the beginning of understanding," she said. "He gave me my first journal when I was 12. I've kept them ever since." She paused. "I have 11 years of dated entries, including detailed accounts of each of those 7 courtships and exactly what was said and by whom." The silence that followed was the kind that happened when something that seemed like a disaster revealed itself to be the opposite. "Evelyn," Caleb said. "I know," she said. That changes. I know." He looked at her, and then he did something he had not done before. He laughed. Not the quiet, almost smile he usually allowed himself. A real laugh, low and warm, and entirely genuine. The laugh of a man who had been holding his breath for 3 weeks on behalf of someone he cared about and had just been told he could breathe. "You have been the most prepared person in this county for 11 years, he said, "and nobody knew it." "Brooks didn't know it," she said. "That's what matters." He looked at her across the porch in the fading summer light. "Can I see them?" he asked. "The journals." She considered him for a moment. "Yes," she said. "I'll show you the relevant entries tonight. I want to go through them before I take them to Alderman, make sure I know exactly what they contain." "I'll help," he said. She nodded. "There's something else," he said. His voice had changed slightly quieter, more careful. "I've been thinking about what comes after. After Alderman files his report. After the rail survey. After Brooks is dealt with one way or another." He met her eyes. "I've been thinking about what I want to say to you when the fight isn't the only thing in front of us." She held his gaze. "Caleb, I'm not asking for an answer right now," he said. "I'm just telling you that the thinking is happening, so you know." He paused. "So you're not surprised when the moment comes." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not easily surprised," she said. "I know," he said. "But I find I want to be careful with you anyway." Something moved through her slow and deep, the way water moved through earth, finding every crack. She had spent 5 years building walls against exactly this. She had the notebook to prove it, 7 names and 5 years of evidence that this particular feeling was not safe and not reliable, and not something she should let herself believe. But she had also spent 5 years learning to trust her own observation. To trust what she actually saw rather than what she was told to see. And what she saw when she looked at Caleb Dawson was not what she had seen in any of those 7 names. "Go get your horse," she said. "The journals are in the study. We have work to do tonight." He stood, picked up his hat. "Yes, ma'am," he said. I walked to his horse and she went inside, and the evening settled over the land in a long, warm hush, and somewhere along the eastern ridge the water was still moving through the channel they had cleared, finding its way through the dark, doing what water did, patient, persistent, unstoppable. She brought the journals to Alderman on Saturday morning. She brought 9 of them, the ones that covered the years of each courtship, each carefully indexed in the front, in her father's handwriting, then her own. She set them on the table in front of Alderman and said, "I understand that a member of this community has made claims about my character. These are my contemporaneous journals from the periods in question. Dated entries, my handwriting written at the time." She paused. "If anyone wants to dispute what happened during those years, they can dispute it against a daily record." Alderman looked at the journals. He looked at her. "Did you know," he said, "when you wrote your original letter to the commissioner's office, that this kind of rebuttal might become necessary?" "No," she said. "I brought them because they document the timeline of the land dealings. The fact that they also document the courtships is additional." Alderman picked up the first journal, opened it, read a few lines. Then he looked up at her with an expression that was, for the first time in their 2 meetings, something close to unguarded. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "I have been doing this work for 31 years. I have dealt with a great many situations involving land fraud and character assassination, and the particular tools that certain men use against certain women in this territory." He paused. "You are the most prepared witness I have encountered in a very long time." She held his gaze steadily. "My father believed that clarity was a form of respect," she said. "I believed it was also a form of protection." He nodded, picked up his pen. "Let's go through them," he said. They worked for 2 hours, and with every page, with every dated entry, and specific observation, and careful, honest record of what had actually happened during those years. The story that Nathaniel Brooks had built over a decade. The story of Evelyn Hartwell as a woman. Too difficult, too unreliable, too problematic to be trusted, came apart at its seams. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But steadily, methodically, the way truth worked when it had been written down by someone who believed in it enough to keep writing it for 11 years. Outside Willow Creek went about its Saturday business, buying and selling and talking and deciding what to believe about the people it contained. And in the boarding house sitting room, a government investigator read the handwritten record of a woman who had never stopped paying attention, and the case against Nathaniel Brooks grew heavier and more solid with every page. By the time they finished, Alderman had filled 4 pages of his own notebook. He looked at the journals, stacked on the table between them. "I'll need these for another day," he said. "I'll treat them carefully." "I know you will," she said. She stood to leave. "Miss Hartwell." He looked at her over his notebook. "I don't make predictions. It's not my role and it's not useful. But I want you to know that what you've brought to this investigation is substantial." He paused. "The commission will not ignore it." She nodded, thanked him, walked out into the Saturday morning. She stood on the step of the boarding house for a moment. 11 journals. 11 years of dated entries. 11 years of a woman who had been told she was too much, too difficult, too something, and who had simply kept writing it all down anyway. Not because she knew it would matter someday, but because her father had taught her that things mattered more when you paid attention to them. She had paid attention, and now it mattered. She walked home through the Saturday market, and people nodded, and she nodded back, and the town moved around her the way it always had, full of its certainties and its habits and its long-established ways of seeing. But something had changed in the architecture of it. Something she could feel, more than see, a shift in the weight of the air, a quality of reconsideration happening in the space between people's eyes and their mouths. The question she had felt beginning on Friday was still growing. What if the story was wrong? She let it grow. She had 11 years of evidence, a government investigator with 4 pages of notes, a cowboy who laughed like he meant it, a woman named Martha who had found her courage, an old man at the depot who had known her father, and water running through a channel that her grandfather's neighbors had built with their hands in the valley she intended to die on. Nathaniel Brooks had 30 years and a charming voice and a very good plan that was coming apart at every seam. She thought about him sitting in his office, recalculating, trying to find the move he had not made, Yet the angle he had not tried the remaining resource he could deploy before everything he had built fell into the light. She hoped he was thinking hard. She hoped it kept him up at night. She walked home, and she felt for the first time in 5 years the particular lightness of a person who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has finally shared the weight with people who were strong enough to hold it. It felt, she thought, like water moving. Patient. Persistent. Unstoppable. Alderman left on Monday. He came to the farm before the morning stage knocked at the gate at 7 o'clock with the journals tucked under his arm and his traveling bag over his shoulder. And Evelyn met him at the gate because she had been up since 5 and had seen him coming down the road. He handed the journals back to her one by one carefully, the way he had handled everything with the respect of a man who understood what he was holding. "I have what I need," he said. "The report goes to the commissioner this week. After that, it moves to the territorial attorney's office." He paused. "These things take time. I want you to understand that. There will not be a resolution next week or the week after." "I understand," she said. "But the documentation you provided, the timeline, the witness testimony, the journals, it's a complete picture." He held her gaze. "A complete picture is rare in these cases. Most of the time we're working from fragments. This is not fragments." She nodded. "How much time?" "The rail survey is Thursday," he said. "That will put the land value on record publicly. Once that happens, the nature of Brooks's offers becomes legally significant in a way it wasn't before." He paused. "The attorney's office will move faster after Thursday." "And Brooks?" Alderman looked at her with the measured expression of someone who did not make promises he could not keep. "Mr. Brooks will have an opportunity to respond to the findings," he said. "That is his right. But I will tell you this, in 31 years, I have seen the kind of documentation you have assembled used in cases like this, and I have seen what follows." A pause. "What follows is not usually good for the man it documents." He tipped his hat, walked back down the road toward the stage stop. She stood at the gate and watched him go. Then she went inside and made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with the journals stacked in front of her, and thought about 31 years and complete pictures and things that were not fragments. She thought about her father writing viable if cleared approximately 3 days' work beside a map of a channel that had not run water in 40 years. She thought about what it meant to keep records, to pay attention, to write things down because they mattered even when no one else thought they did. She picked up the oldest journal, opened it to the first page. Her own handwriting, 12 years old, careful and deliberate. The date at the top. Below it, "Father says the purpose of a journal is not to remember what happened, but to understand it. I am not sure I understand anything yet, but I will try." She closed the journal. She was crying. She had not realized it until she felt it, the slow, quiet kind that was not grief exactly, more like the release of something that had been held in very careful hands for a very long time. She let it happen. She did not try to manage it. Then she wiped her face and picked up her coffee and got back to work. The rail survey team arrived Thursday morning. They were 6 men with equipment and maps and the efficient, purposeful energy of people who had a job to do and intended to do it on schedule. They set up at the eastern end of the valley and began their work, and by afternoon the news had spread through Willow Creek, the way news always spread, fast and imprecise, the core fact intact, but the edges blurred by each telling. The rail line was real. The survey corridor was confirmed. And the land along the eastern valley, including the Hartwell parcel, including the eastern 30 acres that Nathaniel Brooks had been trying to acquire for 6 years, was officially publicly on record as sitting within 300 yards of the proposed route. Evelyn was in town when the news finished spreading. She was at the dry goods store buying thread, and she was standing at the counter when she heard the number, the estimated value per acre, once the line was confirmed, and she watched the woman behind her turn to the woman beside her and say it, and she watched that woman's face change. She paid for the thread. She walked out. On the step of the dry goods store, she passed Tom Aldridge. He stopped. She stopped. He looked at her. He had the expression of a man who had recently done something he was not proud of and was now standing in the consequences of it. The particular discomfort of a person who had told themselves a comfortable story and watched it become uncomfortable. She looked at him. She did not say anything. He said, "Evelyn." She waited. "I told that investigator some things," he said, "about you." He stopped, tried again. "Brooks asked me to. He said it was just to provide context, that you'd been difficult and that—" He stopped again. His jaw worked. "I knew when I was saying it that it wasn't the whole of it. I knew that." She held his gaze. "You were the first name in my notebook," she said. "You told me I talked too much at dinner." He flinched. It was a small movement, but it was real. "I know," he said. "What you said to Alderman," she said carefully, "was not true. Not the characterization you gave. Not the pattern you described. I have 11 years of dated journals that document exactly what happened during that time, and I gave them all to Alderman, and he read them." She paused. "Whatever you said, he now has the record to measure it against." The color that came into Aldridge's face was not anger. It was shame. She recognized the difference. "I'm sorry," he said. It came out plainly without the usual cushioning that people put around apologies to make them easier to deliver. "I should not have done it. I knew it wasn't right when I was doing it, and I did it anyway." She looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "You should not have." She walked past him down the step. She did not tell him she forgave him. She did not tell him she didn't. Forgiveness was a private matter, and she had not yet decided what she felt about Tom Aldridge, and she was not going to perform a feeling she had not arrived at honestly. But she had looked him in the eye and told him the truth. That was enough for today. Brooks called a meeting. That was the thing no one expected. Not Evelyn, not Caleb, not Martha, not Franklin at the depot, who had been watching this territory longer than most of the people in it. The expectation had been that Brooks would go quiet, would manage his affairs privately, would work whatever remaining angles he had through the back channels he had always preferred. Instead, on Friday morning, word went out that Nathaniel Brooks was holding an open meeting at the town hall that evening. All community members welcome. He had things he wanted to say. Evelyn heard about it from Caleb, who appeared at her gate at noon with the news and the expression of someone who had been thinking hard since he heard it and had not yet reached a conclusion. "He's going to try to get ahead of it," Caleb said. "He's going to try to be the one who defines the story before the attorney's office does," she said. "Yes." He looked at her. "Are you going?" She did not hesitate. "Of course I'm going." He nodded. He had expected that. "Then I'm going with you," he said. "I know," she said. He looked at her. Something passed between them. Quiet grounded the kind of communication that had been building for 6 weeks and required no elaboration. 7 o'clock, he said. 6:30, she said. "I want to be there before him." She was there at 6:15. The town hall was a single large room that smelled of old wood and lamp oil, and by the time 7 o'clock arrived, it was fuller than Evelyn had ever seen it. Fuller than the church socials, fuller than the harvest meetings, fuller, even than the day the county representative had come through 2 years ago. Willow Creek had come to hear Nathaniel Brooks, and it had come with the particular appetite of a community that sensed in the way communities sensed things, that something was shifting, and it wanted to be present when it finished shifting. Evelyn sat in the third row. Caleb was beside her. Martha was beside him. Franklin, who almost never came to public meetings, was in the row behind. Brooks came in at 7 exactly. He came in the way he always entered rooms, with the unhurried confidence of a man who expected to be welcome, who had always been welcome, who had every reason to believe that would continue to be the case. He looked at the room. He looked at Evelyn. Something crossed his face. Fast. Gone. He went to the front and turned and spread his hands in the open gesture she had seen 100 times and began to speak. How was good? She had always known he was good. He spoke about the community, about his decades of investment in it, about his genuine desire to see the valley prosper. He spoke about the irrigation channel. He had the audacity to call it a wonderful community effort and say he had always believed in the power of neighbors helping neighbors. He spoke about the rail line with the tone of a man sharing exciting news he was glad everyone now knew about. And then he pivoted. He said there had been some confusion recently. Some accusations made by a young woman who had, unfortunately, a long history of conflict with the men of this community. He did not want to speak ill of anyone. He genuinely wished Miss Hartwell well. But in the interest of transparency, a word he used 3 times, the community deserved to know that the claims being investigated were without foundation, that he had fully cooperated with the government investigator, and that he had every confidence the matter would be resolved in a manner that reflected the truth. He said it all smoothly, warmly, with the practiced reasonableness of someone who had been saying versions of it for 30 years. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Daniel Pratt stood up. Pratt was not an eloquent man. He was a farmer who had spent most of his life working land and raising children and not saying much in public forums, because he had not before this week felt that public forums were a place where men like him needed to be. But he stood up in the town hall on Friday evening, and he looked at Nathaniel Brooks and he said, "I'd like to ask something." Brooks looked at him with an expression of attentive openness. "Of course, Daniel. You said Miss Hartwell has a history of conflict with the men in this community," Pratt said. "I've known Evelyn Hartwell for 10 years. I've never seen her start a conflict. I've seen her finish a few, but that's different." He paused. "I'd also like to know, and I'd like everyone here to think about this, why it was Miss Hartwell who found the water, why she had those maps, why she organized the clearing, and why when my family was 3 days from a real crisis, it was her idea and her work that solved it." He looked at Brooks. "And why you showed up at the channel site asking about water rights instead of picking up a shovel." The room was very still. Brooks smiled. "I understand why you feel that way, Daniel and I." "I'm not finished," Pratt said. Brooks stopped. "I was in that feed store meeting," Pratt said. "When she walked in and unrolled those maps, most of us were ready to dismiss her before she opened her mouth, because that's what we always do, isn't it? That's what this town has been doing to that woman for years." He looked around the room. And she knew it. She knew we'd look at her that way. And she stood up there anyway and told us the truth, and we went, and it worked. He sat down. "That's what I know about Evelyn Hartwell's character. Make of it what you will." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Evelyn had heard in a long time. She did not turn around. She did not look at the room. She looked straight ahead, and she breathed evenly, and she felt in the specific private center of herself. Something. She had no adequate name for. Something that was not vindication, which was too small a word, and not relief, which was too passive. Something closer to the sound of a thing that had been holding its breath for 5 years, finally being allowed to exhale. Then the Hennessy brother, who had shaken her hand on market day, spoke up. And then a woman in the back, whose name Evelyn barely knew. And then 2 more people. Not all of them were on her side. There were voices that held to Brooks's version, that pushed back, that offered the comfortable middle ground of, well, there's truth on both sides. But the room had fractured in a way that Willow Creek rooms did not usually fracture, and Brooks could feel it, and everyone in the room could feel him feeling it, and that itself was a kind of reckoning. Brooks regained control of the meeting by the force of long practice. He thanked everyone for their candor. He reiterated his respect for all members of the community. He closed the meeting with the appearance of a man who had accomplished what he came to accomplish. But he had not, and he knew it. Evelyn knew it too. She was on the front step of the town hall pulling on her gloves in the warm night air when Brooks came out behind her. He did not have Vane with him. He came alone, and he stopped on the step beside her, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the sounds of the town settling into its Friday night moved around them. "That went better for you than for me," he said. His voice had dropped the warmth. He was not performing now. He was speaking to her the way he should have spoken to her 6 years ago, plain direct, one person to another. "Yes," she said. "It did." "I underestimated you," he said. She looked at him. "Yes, you did." He was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the main street of the town he had spent 30 years building his position in. "What do you want?" he said. "From the investigation. What is it you actually want to come of this?" She turned to face him fully. "I want the land," she said. "It's mine. I want it to stay mine with no further interference, no further approaches, no further quiet conversations with bank managers or land agents or anyone else." She held his gaze. I want the record to show what you did. Not to destroy you. I don't need to destroy you. But because the record matters. Because the truth of what happened matters, even when it's inconvenient. He looked at her. In the lamplight, she could see something in his face that she had not seen there before. Not remorse. She did not think it was remorse, but something adjacent to it. The particular expression of a man confronting the fact that he had built his life on a calculation that had been in some important way wrong. You are, he said slowly, exactly the way they described you. She raised an eyebrow. Immovable, he said. It came out without the edge she expected. Almost, she thought, with something like recognition. The men who couldn't manage you, they weren't wrong that you were immovable. They were just wrong about whether that was a problem. She looked at him for a long moment. Good night, Mr. Brooks, she said. She walked down the step and into the night. Behind her, she heard him say very quietly to no one in particular, Good night, Miss Hartwell. She did not turn around. Joel. Caleb was waiting for her at the corner. He had hung back when she came out. She had seen him do it, seen him read the situation and give her the space to handle it, which was one of the things she had learned about him in 6 weeks that she had not expected to learn. He knew when to stand beside her, and he knew when to stand back, and he understood the difference, and that understanding was rarer than almost anything else she had found in a person. She came to the corner, and they walked together without speaking for half a block. What did he say? Caleb asked. He said I was immovable. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Is that what he called it? Yes. A pause. He's not wrong, Caleb said. No, she said. He's not. They walked. Pratt, she said. Yes. I didn't expect that. I know, Caleb said. I don't think he expected it either. He paused. I think watching his son work that channel for 4 days did something to him that he's still figuring out. She thought about Daniel Pratt's boy standing at the valley end of the channel with his hand in the water. About the sound that came out of him that was not quite a word. People surprise you, she said. The right people do, Caleb said. They came to the fork in the road, where his direction and hers diverged, and they stopped, and the night was warm and full of the sounds of a summer evening in a small town. A dog. A distant voice, the creak of a settling building somewhere. Evelyn, he said. She looked at him. I want to say something, he said. And I want to say it here tonight, not because the timing is perfect, it isn't particularly, but because I have been waiting for the right moment for 6 weeks, and I have begun to suspect there is no right moment, and that waiting for one is just a way of not saying the thing. She waited. I came to Willow Creek for land, he said. That part was true. What wasn't in the plan was you. He held her gaze steadily. What wasn't in the plan was finding someone who carries a notebook with 7 names in it, and still gets up every morning and runs a farm and fights the right fights and does not ask anyone's permission to be exactly what she is. He paused. I have not been the same since the stockyard. I don't expect to be. Another pause. I would like if you are willing to stop pretending that what I feel is only about aligned business interests. The night held them. Evelyn looked at him. She looked at him the way she looked at documents she intended to understand completely carefully, thoroughly, without hurrying. You know what the 7th man told me, she said. That I would die alone. That I had no one to blame but myself. Yes, he said. You told me. I wrote it in the notebook, she said, below his name. And then I sat with it for 3 years deciding whether it was true or whether it was just a cruel thing said by a frightened man. She paused. I decided eventually that it was the second. But deciding that didn't make the first feel less true. She held his gaze. What I'm telling you is that I do not come to this easily. I am not easy in general. I know, he said. I have never been interested in easy. She breathed. I have the notebook, she said. I have 11 years of journals. I have a farm and a fight and a government investigation in progress, and a channel to maintain and cattle to sell in October. She paused. I have a great deal. I know, he said. And I want... She stopped. Started again. I find that I want someone to share it with, not to manage it. Not to take it from me. Not to make me smaller so they can feel larger. She looked at him. To stand beside it with me. The way you have been standing. He was very still. I am standing, he said quietly. I intend to keep standing. She nodded. All right, she said. It was not a grand declaration. It was not the kind of thing that would make a story a person told at parties. But it was true, and it was grounded, and it was between two people who had learned each other through 6 weeks of honest, difficult, real proximity, and it was enough. More than enough. He offered his arm. She took it. They walked. The attorney's office in Helena received Alderman's report on the following Wednesday. The report was, as Alderman had told her, it would be substantial. It detailed the timeline of Brooks's offers against the survey approval. It documented the pattern of social and financial pressure. It included Martha's signed testimony, Caleb's written account, the bank notice, and paid receipt, and extensive reference to the journal entries. It noted without editorial comment the remarkable completeness of Miss Hartwell's documentation and the precision of the timeline she had constructed. The attorney's office sent a letter to Brooks the following week, requesting documentation and a formal response to the findings. Brooks's lawyer sent a reply. It was measured and professional, and it was at its core the beginning of a retreat. Evelyn read the letter that Caleb brought to her. He had a contact in Helena who passed him summaries when they were relevant, and she read it twice and then set it down on the kitchen table and looked at it for a moment. He's going to settle, she said. His lawyer is already using language that sounds like positioning for a settlement, Caleb said. He doesn't want to go to a public proceeding. Too much of what you have documented would become part of the formal record. Which is exactly what he's afraid of, she said. Not the penalty, the record. Yes. Caleb looked at her. What do you want the settlement to include? She had thought about this. She had been thinking about it since the night of the town hall meeting, since Brooks had said, "What do you want on the front step?" Full quit claim on any interest he's asserted or implied in the eastern parcel, she said. In writing notarized filed with the county. A formal acknowledgement that the offers made were based on advanced knowledge of the survey approval that was not disclosed. And, she paused. A public statement. Not long, not elaborate. Simply that the claims made about my character during this period were unfounded. Caleb looked at her. He won't like that last one, he said. No, she said. He won't. Do you need it? Legally, the first two are what protect the land. She met his gaze. I need it because the town needs it, she said. Not for me, I stopped needing the town's approval a long time ago. But there are women in this community who were told the same things I was told, who have been living under the weight of the same story, and they deserve to watch that story get corrected. Publicly. On the record. She paused. That's not revenge. That's repair. He held her gaze for a long moment. Repair, he said. Yes. He nodded slowly. Then we push for all three. Brooks agreed to all three. Not immediately. Not without his lawyer sending 2 rounds of carefully worded counterproposals that tried to soften the public statement into something vague enough to mean nothing. Evelyn rejected both counterproposals with responses that were brief and specific about what she would and would not accept, and she signed them with the same clean, deliberate hand she used for ledgers. The final agreement was signed at the county courthouse in Helena on a Thursday in October, 6 days after the first cattle sale of the season, which had gone well, which had cleared her debt to Caleb with 2 weeks to spare, which she had noted in her journal that evening with a satisfaction she did not bother to moderate. She was not in Helena for the signing. Her lawyer, a woman she had found in Helena after 2 weeks of looking, because she had decided that if she was going to have legal representation, it was going to be someone who understood precisely why this case had the shape it did, handled the signing. Evelyn was at the farm, which was where she intended to be. She was in the barn when Caleb rode in with the news. He came through the barn door the way he had come that first time, with his hat in his hand, and the particular quality of attention he carried everywhere. And she looked up from the stall she was working in and read his face. It's done, he said. She straightened. All three, she said. All three, he said. Exactly the language you specified. She set down what she was holding. She breathed. She had spent 6 months carrying this from the stockyard to the notebook, to the letter, to the channel, to the journals, to the town hall, to the attorney's office, to this moment in a barn on a Thursday in October, with a man who had read every name in her notebook and said they were afraid of you and had not been wrong. 6 months. She breathed it out. "All right," she said. "All right." He looked at her with something that was almost amused. "That's what you've got. What would you like me to say?" "I don't know," he said. "Something commensurate with winning." She considered him. Then she walked out of the stall and crossed the barn to where he was standing, and she looked up at him, and she said, "We won." He smiled. The full version, the one she had only seen a handful of times, the one that was entirely genuine and entirely unguarded. "We won," he said, and she kissed him. She had never done anything like it before in her life, had never once made the first move in the direction of anything like this, had always waited to be pursued, and then retreated from the pursuit 7 times over. But she had decided 3 weeks ago, lying awake thinking about what she had said on the corner after the town hall, that she was done waiting. That she had waited long enough for everything in her life, and that this specifically was not something she intended to wait on any longer. He kissed her back the way she had somehow known he would, with the same steady, unhurried attention he brought to everything. Not surprised. Not performing surprise. Simply present and glad. When she pulled back, he was looking at her with that expression again. The one she had finally, after 6 weeks, found a name for. It was the look of someone who had been paying the right kind of attention to the right person for the right reasons. "I have a question," he said. "Ask it," she said. "The notebook," he said. 7 names. What happens to it now?" She thought about it. The worn leather cover. The cracked spine held together with brown ribbon. The careful handwriting of every date and every name and every margin note that had been the private record of 5 years of standing alone. "I'm going to put it in the study," she said. "With the journals. It's part of the record." She paused. "But I don't think I need to carry it in my pocket anymore." He looked at her. "No," he said. "I don't think you do." The public statement ran in the county paper the following week. It was not long. Brooks's lawyers had made it as brief as legally possible, and Evelyn had accepted the brevity because she had not needed the length. She had needed the words, and the words were there, a clear, formal acknowledgement that the representations made about Miss Evelyn Hartwell's character during the period in question had been without factual basis, and that any claims made to the contrary were withdrawn. Martha read it at the kitchen table, the morning it came out with her coffee, going cold beside her, and she looked up at Evelyn when she was done, and said, "How does it feel?" Evelyn thought about it honestly. "Quiet," she said. It feels quiet." Martha nodded like she understood. "The loud things," Evelyn said, "were happening inside me. The argument I've been having with myself for 5 years about whether those 7 men were right, about whether the town was right." She paused. "That argument is quiet now, not because everyone agrees with me. They don't, and some of them never will." She looked at Martha. "Because I stopped needing them to." Martha reached across the table and covered Evelyn's hand with hers. She did not say anything. She just held it for a moment, and Evelyn let her, and the kitchen was warm, and the October morning was coming through the window, and the water was still moving through the channel out in the valley. The wedding was in November. It was not a large affair. Neither of them wanted large. They wanted honest, which was different, and what they got was exactly that. Franklin at the front of the church, reading the words in his careful, deliberate voice, Martha beside Evelyn, because she had asked her to stand there, and Martha had said yes without hesitation, and the small gathering of people who had earned the right to be present by being the people they had actually been through all of it. Daniel Pratt was there, his wife, his 2 boys who had worked the channel, the Hennessy brother who had shaken her hand on market day, a handful of others, people who had revised their story about Evelyn Hartwell and had the courage to let the revision show. Tom Aldridge was not there. She had not invited him. That bridge was under construction. She was not ready to walk it yet, and she was not going to pretend she was. She wore her mother's dress altered by Martha to fit a body that had spent 26 years working land rather than sitting decorative. She carried no flowers. She had looked at the option and decided it was not honest to her, and she was done with things that were not honest to her. She carried the notebook, not to hold on to it, not because she still needed it the way she had, but because it had been part of her story, and she was not ashamed of it, and she was not going to walk away from the woman who had kept it through 5 years of standing alone, as though that woman were something to be left behind. That woman was her. She was proud of her. Caleb saw it when she came down the aisle. Saw her hand go to her apron pocket, and he understood it immediately. The way he understood most things about her, not because she had explained it, but because he had been paying the right kind of attention for a long time. When she stood in front of him, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something she had not expected. A small piece of paper folded twice. He held it out to her. She took it, unfolded it. It was a list. 7 names written in his handwriting. Not the same 7 names as hers. Different names. Women he had watched be dismissed, diminished, overlooked in his life, starting with his mother's name at the top, in careful letters, and ending with a blank line at the bottom. She looked at him. "I've been carrying that for a long time," he said quietly. "Different shape than yours, but the same weight." He paused. "I thought you should know." She looked at the list. She looked at him. She folded both pieces of paper together, hers and his, and put them in her pocket. "We'll keep them together," she said. "Yes," he said. "We will." Franklin cleared his throat. Said with the practiced warmth of a man who had known Evelyn Hartwell since she was 12 years old, and had waited a long time to say these particular words over her, "Shall we begin?" They began. The eastern 30 acres were surveyed formally in December, and the land value recorded with the county. The rail line was confirmed the following spring. The Hartwell parcel, both parcels hers and the 12 miles north that was now Caleb's, sat squarely in the corridor that tripled land value in the Eastern Valley. Nathaniel Brooks sold his holdings in Willow Creek the following year. He did not announce his departure. He simply left the way men like him left, when the calculation had finally gone irretrievably against them, quietly and without looking back. Evelyn noted his departure in her journal. 1 sentence. Then she moved on to the next entry. The irrigation channel continued to run. The following spring, 3 families from the western edge of the valley who had struggled with water access came to Evelyn about extending it. She sat with them at the kitchen table and spread the old settler maps, and they worked through it together. How far the source could sustain, where the grade would cooperate, what work it would take. She wrote the estimates in a new ledger with the same clean hand her father had taught her. They extended the channel in May, and in June, when the first water reached the Dillard farm at the far western edge, the farthest it had ever run. The farthest anyone had thought it could run. Eleanor Dillard, who was 71 years old and had farmed that land since before Evelyn was born, stood at the edge of the new channel with her hands at her sides and watched the water come. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Your father would be something to see right now." Evelyn stood beside her and looked at the water. "He would have taken credit for it," she said. Eleanor laughed. "Yes, he would have." They stood together in the June morning and watched the water run, and the valley spread out around them, green and alive and stubborn. The way it had always been stubborn. The way the people who worked it had always been stubborn. And the way Evelyn was beginning to understand it, intended to stay. Years later, when people in Willow Creek told the story, and they told it the way small towns tell the stories that shape them, they told it different ways. Some told it as a love story. The woman who'd been refused by every man in town, and the cowboy who saw what those men missed. Some told it as a land story. The scheme that failed because the woman kept records. Some told it as a water story. The drought and the channel, and what could happen when a person with the right maps stood up in a room full of people who needed answers. But the ones who knew her best, Martha and Franklin and Daniel Pratt, and the women who came later to ask her things they were afraid to ask elsewhere, they told it as something harder to name. The story of a woman who had been told 7 different times by 7 different men in 7 different ways that she was too much, who had written every word of it down. who had carried it carefully for 5 years, not as a wound, but as a record, and who had understood finally that the problem had never been that she was too much. The problem was that the world had not yet caught up to her. It did. Evelyn Hartwell. Dawson lived on that land for the rest of her life. She ran it and improved it and passed knowledge of it on to anyone who asked. She kept journals until the last year of her life, neat, dated, precise, honest. She never threw out the notebook with the 7 names in it. She kept it in the study with all the others in a box beside the old settler maps her father had saved, and the folded piece of paper Caleb had handed her on their wedding day, the one with the blank line at the bottom. The blank line had not stayed blank. She had filled it in herself on the night of the wedding, sitting at the desk in the lamplight while Caleb slept in the next room. She had written her own name, not as a wound, not as a record of what had been done to her, but as a reminder to herself in her own careful hand, in her own words, on her own page, of the woman who had stood in a stockyard in July and handed a stranger a notebook and said, "So you know what you're walking into," and who had not once, not for a single moment, despite everything, been willing to become smaller. She had been exactly the right size. The world had caught up, and the water was still running.